I'm Tom Congdon. I am the chair of the Indian Point Closure Task Force and the Decommissioning Oversight Board, and I am calling this joint meeting to order. Thank you all for participating. Thank you, Supervisor Becker, for hosting us and providing the IT support. Greatly appreciate that.
It's going to go smooth tonight.
We're hoping so. I'd like to publicly apologize for the technical problems at the last meeting. We think we've taken some corrective actions, and I hope tonight goes much better, especially for those of you tuning in virtually. Next slide, please. Just a few logistical points I'd like to make for our in-person panelists. It's very important that you speak into the mic. This is a hybrid meeting with Zoom participants, and the folks participating by Zoom will only hear us if we are speaking into our mic. So please remember to use the mic. Tonight's meeting will cover some business with some updates from Holtec on decommissioning activities and from state agencies on some oversight activities, but the majority of our time tonight is going to be spent with the public forum. The public participants who pre-registered with questions by the stated deadline will be given the first priority for the public forum session. We did receive other questions, and we are committed to answering those. If we have time tonight, we'll answer them here. If we run out of time, we've documented all those questions and we'll be providing written responses. For those of you participating in the public forum, when it's your turn to speak, staff will unmute the participants when it's your turn. Next slide. I'd like to quickly do a roll call for the attendance of the members. I'll just start at the top with Senator Pete Harcum.
Here.
Assemblywoman Galef.
Here.
Ryan Coyne from Department of Public Service. Here. Tom Kazmarek from DPS.
Here.
Kelly Turturro, DEC.
Here.
Jeff Goinup from Department of Labor.
Here.
Mark Pattison, Department of State, I believe is virtual.
Here.
Hello.
Here.
Scott Palladino, Department of Taxation and Finance. Possibly virtual, possibly not. Jennifer Waka from Dishes.
Here.
Tom Scaglione from ESD.
I'm here, virtual.
Tony Hill from NYPA.
It's Anthony here.
Hi, Anthony. Thank you. Elise Peterson from NYSERDA in the room.
Here.
Hi, Elise. Our labor representatives, Lou Picani, is not here. Is he virtual? Lou? No? Bill Smith?
Here.
Tom Carey.
I'm here, virtual.
Hi, Tom.
Tom.
Now, turning to our local representatives, Supervisor Becker.
Here.
Mayor Knickerbocker.
Present. I want to be different.
Susan Spear.
Here.
Catherine Borgia. She may be virtual, may be coming.
Here.
Oh, great.
Here.
Hi, Catherine. Glad you could join on virtual. Thank you. Colin Smith. I know Joe Hochreiter will be in person, but about 15 minutes late, so we'll see him soon. And now turn to our technical expert, Dave Lockbaum.
Here.
Really pleased Dave was able to join us in person. Welcome. And Richard Webster from Riverkeeper.
Yes, present.
Hello. So that shows we have a quorum. We'll move on. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, our agenda tonight, we will be receiving some updates from our state agencies involved in oversight activities, as well as from Holtec to discuss what has been going on at the site since our last meeting and what is expected between now and our September meeting. And then we'll turn it into the public forum. Next slide, please. Just a reminder to the public for following all of the activities of the Decommissioning Oversight Board. We strongly recommend that you subscribe to our service list. We have a website. We've improved the website based on feedback from the community. The website can bring you to a document library, and at that document library, which looks like what you see on the screen here, there is a button to subscribe to the service list. The service list will generate automatic emails to you whenever there's a new document posted in the document library, and it will also send you an email notifying you of meetings. So we strongly recommend using this tool. Next. And also just a reminder to everyone working at the plant, we want to hear from you if you see anything that is of concern. We have a whistleblower tip line, both via our website, email, and phone. And want to just publicize this again for employees at the site. We appreciate your work, and we want to keep you safe and the public safe. Thank you. Next. So now I want to turn it over to Ryan Coyne, our Assistant Counsel, to provide some updates. Ryan?
Thank you, Tom. If you could move to the next slide, please. So I think as most members of the board know, Indian Point is one of the few sites in the country that has this type of continuous real-time radiation monitoring system set up. That data is fed to both county and state officials, and we monitor it. And if you could just move to the next slide, please. That's a map of where the monitors are located with some of the most recent data that we've received from those monitors. And to date, there have been no readings that have caused any concern. And we will continue to monitor that data going forward. Next slide, please. Just a brief update on oversight activities that have occurred since the last DOB meeting. I think the most significant development is the hiring of Cliff Chapin, who is now our New York State resident inspector at the Indian Point site. I think Mr. Chapin's been on the job for about 2 weeks now. He is a permanent day-to-day presence on the site. He's going to be monitoring decommissioning activities. I think, are we going to introduce Mr. Chapin at some point?
Feel free to say a few words into the mic.
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. I guess just a little background on my career. Majority of my career was in commercial nuclear power. That included 19 years as a senior reactor operator. In 2016, I came over to Indian Point, and while I was there, I worked in both training management and work management. And I left with the first wave of employees in May of 2020, following the shutdown of the first reactor. Over the last couple of years, I've worked as a supervisor in waste to energy. And when this opportunity came up earlier in the year, I felt it was an opportunity for me to more broadly use my background and experience, and I'm honored to have been selected. Thank you.
Terrific, thanks, Cliff. And we are thrilled to have him on board. We know he's going to be a real asset in both the DOB's and the DOB's constituent agencies' oversight work in the coming years. So thank you, Cliff. Other oversight activities, Holtec continues to comply with their reporting requirements under the joint proposal. There have been no concerning reports with respect to temperature of the spent fuel pool or effluent safety data as of this date. Could you move to the next slide, please? Project and financial reporting. One development since the most recent DOB meeting. We have, state regulators have met with Holtec leadership and specifically their investment and finance team to perform our biannual review of the status of the decommissioning trust funds. The JP requirements are continuing to be complied with and everything seems to be on track there. Next slide, please. Federal engagement. The DOB and its constituent agencies continue to engage with the federal government on Indian Point oversight matters. There are currently pending several license amendment requests and exemptions from Holtec. I think Mr. Baroni is going to discuss those in a little bit. For each of these applications, the DOB reviews the contents and determines whether there's any concerns from a state perspective with what Holtec is proposing to do. And if comments are necessary following that review to either Holtec or the NRC or both, they will be made. So the state review of those license amendment requests is ongoing. Next slide, please. And then finally, on the federal side, the United States Department of Energy is at the site this week. They are there as part of an ongoing effort that they've undertaken to assess transportation infrastructure at all of the country's nuclear sites. The idea is to determine what resources are available to eventually transfer both the spent fuel casks and the greater than Class C waste to an interim or permanent repository whenever that day comes. They've so far reviewed, I think, something like 18 or 20 of the country's sites, including Oyster Creek and Pilgrim, and they're currently doing that review at Indian Point. Some members of the DOB are going to meet with them tomorrow morning to discuss what they've found this week, and then when that review is complete, we anticipate inviting them to a future DOB meeting to present to the full board and the public as well. And with that, I think I turn it over to Kelly Turturro and the DEC update.
Good evening. Thank you, Ryan. So just an update on DEC oversight activities under our administrative order on consent. We continue to work with Holtec to finalize both the citizen participation plan and scoping work plan. We've recently gotten revised drafts from Holtec, and our team is reviewing those drafts. We hope to be finalized soon on those two documents. Next slide, please. And then in terms of our governing jurisdiction, the Department of Environmental Conservation's governing jurisdiction in terms of permits, there are 2 speedies permits in place at the facility. One covers the main facility, and as I've reported in past meetings, DEC is undertaking a technical review of that permit to determine whether a modification is necessary for the permit. That review is ongoing. Secondly, there is an additional speedies permit that covers stormwater discharges from a transformer's secondary containment system at the plant. We are renewing that permit, and the permit renewal public notice will be in the department's environmental notice bulletin, likely next week, but definitely within the next couple weeks. So what that will do is provide the public an opportunity to comment on the permit renewal. But I do want everybody to know that there are no changes to that permit. It will be the same permit as has existed for many years. Holtec also has a major oil storage facility license. What this basically governs is petroleum storage at the site. We are working with Holtec to make sure that the department is monitoring the closure of these tanks as Holtec works to close the tanks at the facility. Next slide, please. And then finally, with regard to dust mitigation, we continue to work with Westchester County and the Village of Buchanan to ensure that the appropriate state regulations are incorporated into the village's demolition permit for the demolition of the facility. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Kelly. Any questions for either Ryan or Kelly? Sandy?
All right, I have 2 questions. First of all, the tips, the whistleblower, how many have been called in at this point? Do we have any idea?
I believe 0. Tom? 0. Ryan?
0.
Yeah, 0.
Okay, maybe we need to advertise it.
We advertise every meeting.
Anyway, okay. Second thing is, I think you indicated, Ryan Coyne indicated that they were under budget, but on time. Could you tell us what monies they have spent to date and why you say they're under budget? Because we don't have any fiscal accounting here that I know of. And it is, our money, so.
Yes, understood. I don't, if I suggested that I was representing that they were under budget, then I was not being clear. What I meant to say was that they are in compliance with all of their reporting requirements, and they're in compliance with the minimum trust fund balance obligations that are specified in the joint proposal. Those are the two criteria that we, determined were satisfied through the June financial reporting meeting.
Can we get an accounting at the next, I guess we don't have an accounting right now, right?
So there's two check-ins over the course of the year on the status of the decommissioning trust funds. The one that we just passed is the March filing with the NRC, which specifies the balances of the decommissioning trust funds as of December 31st of the preceding year. So that filing was made. That was the filing that was discussed at the June meeting with Holtec's leadership. Also under the JP, the state has a second biannual check-in that is less of a formal accounting, but is nevertheless an opportunity for agency staff, and specifically DPS's Office of Audits, Accounting, and Finance, to discuss just overall investment strategy and health of the fund with Holtec's investment team. On top of that, at the monthly meetings, which the state representatives have attended each of the monthly meetings since the process began, Holtec gives an interim update on the money that has been spent on the previous month and money that's been spent cumulatively. So we have a window into that spending. What we can say from that is that it is, and Rich Brune, I think, can speak to this more specifically, they are close to the projections that they made to the NRC at the outset in the PSDAR. Whether it's exactly under budget, I don't know off the top of my head, but they are close to the projections that they provided to the NRC back in 2019, 2020.
Right, just as a follow-up, as a member here, I think I need to know the numbers from some report somewhere. So if we can have a consistent, each time, I mean, if there's a change, whatever reports have come out, if we could just have that, and I think the public should have it, actually, because it is our money, and so I think we should be able to track it. So that's my suggestion.
I think that's a fine suggestion, and we can provide I think they're public reports to the NRC, and we can provide those numbers at future meetings. Okay?
And what is the current balance? Because I think it was 2.3 billion, and I think a lot of it's in the trust fund is you don't have an amount.
We don't have the
Okay,
numbers
so-
on the top of our head. Rich may be able to speak
Okay.
to that when he comes
All
up.
right, just curious.
Senator Harcum?
Thank you. Yeah, good question. I agree with Assemblymember Galiff that this is an oversight board, and it is in large part about the finances. So I certainly agree with Sandy that just on a month, every meeting we should have, even if it's bottom line, then if there are major deviations, we can have conversation about it. But I think that's an important thing. Question I have, I don't know whether it was last meeting or the meeting before, we had a robust discussion about a waiver request on the emergency management plan. And Ryan, you mentioned a request to waive cyber security plan requirements. Can you give us some detail? Is that just a technical thing, or, it just seems with what's going on in the world, we want to have as stringent cyber security measures as possible. So could you give us a little more detail as to what that bullet was in your presentation?
Certainly, Senator, yes. So, and I'm probably not the best person to speak to the technical aspects of the application. It is one of the license amendment requests that Holtec has filed for. There is some time before we anticipate the NRC is going to take any action on it, and what I know is that the staff of the DOB's constituent agencies are reviewing it to determine whether we need to make any statements to the NRC about whether we think it's appropriate or not. As to the specifics of the request that they've made, I think I would have to defer to either Mr. Barone or perhaps somebody else, a different staff person.
All right, is it possible that Rich could address this when he does his presentation?
Right, and now Dave Lockbaum can also speak to some of the technical requests.
Great, thank you.
Particularly the cybersecurity, this is Dave Lockbaum, particularly the cybersecurity aspect. For operating plants, there are some plants that a hacker could get in and affect safety equipment or the power distribution to the plant. Indian Point's current configuration is that neither one of those pathways, even if it were present, couldn't lead to a release of radiation. So the cybersecurity rules that were developed after 9/11 to protect against radiological release really don't apply to a plant that's permanently shut down in a configuration like Indian Point. So I assume that's, the NRC has approved other exemption requests for cybersecurity for those reasons, and they're looking to make sure that is the case at Indian Point before they thumbs up or thumbs down the request.
Thanks.
In other words, just to be crystal clear, for non-technical guy, the decommissioning underway at the plant, because it's no longer operating, it's now cut off and not connected at all to any networks that could invite a cyber attack?
Well, there is potential in excess for things like human resources, worker control and stuff like that, but nothing for safety.
Microphone.
There is the potential for access for a hacker to get into things like human resources, payroll and accounting and worker radiation exposure records, but nothing that would affect public safety at this point.
Thanks, Dave.
Tom, just a brief request we're receiving from those joining virtually. Please introduce yourselves as you're speaking. They're not always able to see the name placards.
Okay, thanks, Tom. This is Tom Congdon. Any other questions from DOB members? Okay. At this time, I'd like to invite Rich Baroni to come to the table. Tom Carey? Yep. Tom Carey.
Was a cyber attack?
Tom Carey, could you start over on your question? You were cutting in and out. Could you try again? Tom Carey, we're having a difficult time hearing you. I think you were trying to ask a question. Perhaps you can use the chat. Could I ask one of the technical folks to give Tom a call and see if he can work it out while we proceed? Thank you. So, welcome, Rich Baroni from Holtec. Appreciate your regular appearances at the DOB and your accessibility to answer questions. We appreciate that very much. Rich will be. I think it should work. Go ahead and speak in to test it out.
Yep.
It's on.
You got it? All right.
Yep. So welcome, Rich.
Thank you very much. Basically, the presentation I'll give is really the progress we've made since the last meeting and where we project ourselves to be come the September meeting. We'll focus on our dry fuel project, which includes our independent spent fuel storage installation, our SFSI pad, and then we'll talk about where we stand with the fuel pool at both units and the adoption of a high lift crane that we'll use at Unit 3. Then I'll go into vessel segmentation. That's really our second critical path, right? And the intent of fuel to pad and vessel segmentation is to get all the major radionuclide components secured so that we can then really work on the site as a construction project. And that's really the philosophy there. Then I'll get into some building demolitions that we've done, NOC inspections and activities. If we want to further discuss the LARs, I can do that. And then we did have a feeder line interruption, 13 Whiskey 92, which is 93, which is a feeder from the Buchanan Switchyard to Indian Point. We've since resolved. All right, next slide, please. So just to recap, the dry fuel project concludes with all fuel from both spent fuel pools on the independent spent fuel storage installation pads. And the protected area fence and monitoring systems, we project all that to be done by October of 2023. Right, and if you look at the joint proposal, I think the date in there is December of 2023, so we're trying to beat that date. The SFSI pad and the dry fuel project, like I said, is one of two critical path activities that we have going on site. The existing pad, and most of you have come for a tour, so you've seen it. The existing pad will hold 75 casks. The new pad will hold 52 casks. So since the last Oversight Board meeting, we've completed the concrete pour on the new pad. We've continued with grading around the existing and the new pad, and we've continued with preparations to support monitoring equipment. There'll be a full security system there, lighting, and whatever we need to make that our protected area. And then projected through September, we'll complete the grading, we'll complete the installation of the monitoring equipment and the lighting stanchions, and then we'll continue to work on there'll be 3 actual fences or 3 protected areas there. There'll be the protected area fence, the SOCA fence, which is the security-only controlled area, and the vehicle barrier. So you'll have 3 of those barriers around the spent fuel casks at the end of the day. Next slide. So this first photo just shows the contouring around the pad. Also, you can see the poles that are being installed for fencing and lighting and the security equipment. Giordano Contractors has the major work that they're doing there in that facility there. Next slide. That's our completed pad. What we have left to do is you can see around the perimeter of the pad, there's a space there. We're putting drainage systems in, and then we'll level it off with gravel. And then what we'll do is then grade that to be at the same elevation as the existing pad. So if we have to go back and forth, we can. We don't project that we have to do that, but we'll have that ability. That's it on the Asphyxia pad. For the Unit 2 fuel pool and the spent fuel pool building activities, just to recap, 896 fuel assemblies need to be cast at Unit 2. And that's going to require 28 casks. Unit 3, 1,280 assemblies need to be cast, and that'll require 41 casks. So the Unit 2 spent fuel pool offload campaign is scheduled to start August 8th, a couple weeks from now. And the Unit 3 spent fuel pool offload campaign, that's scheduled to start in February of '23, and we'll finish that up in October of '23. So right now at Unit 2, we've completed the rail repairs outside the spent fuel building. The rail system was used to transport the high storm out of the building. The grout underneath the steel plates they needed repair since we put them in back in 2007, 2008 timeframe. The grout just needed to be resurfaced. We did that, got that done. We've completed our preventive maintenance activities on our fuel handling machine, right, that handles the fuel within the building, the cask handling crane, which will move actually the casks within the spent fuel pool building, and the vertical cask transporter. We've also accepted delivery of the new MPCs in the high storms. Those will contain the fuel. And we've had readiness review meetings for the defuel of the pool. We've had them for the last 3 or 4 months on a weekly basis. Basically, we come up with a punch list of activities that need to be done prior to defuel, and that's working out well so far. We have also established a schedule. So through September, we should start the Unit 2 spent fuel pool offload, like I said, in August. Per the current schedule, 17 casks of Unit 2 fuel will be on the existing pad, and 11 will go on the new pad. And that's a projected finish again to February of '23. By September, we should have 9 casks on the existing pad. Then if you turn the page, you can see where we call it the cattle chute, for lack of a better name. But you can see where we had to repair the grout that was degraded over time. We repaired that, and then we put the steel plate in and resurfaced the road. But it's all set to go for the high storms to be pulled out of the building. Over to Unit 3. We continue to modify the building because of the high lift and its configuration and structure. We need to modify the ductwork within the building. We want to get some reliable heating in there for the winter months for the workers. There's some walkways that have to be modified, and the backup spent fuel pool cooling system has to be modified also. The high lift was manufactured by Holtec at the Holtec facility in Pittsburgh. And it was full load tested at 100% load and 125% of full load. so it works very well. What we need to do now through September is we'll complete the modifications in the building, but we still need to do an additional factory load test prior to its shipment at Indian Point. Really what we're projecting, and this is beyond September, we want to have the high lift installed by Thanksgiving timeframe, and then we want to go through some initial station acceptance testing by Christmas. And what that does is it affords us some time for training to work out any other issues that we need to work out prior to the February 23 timeframe that we'll be using the high lift structure. So these pictures show the high lift. It's one-dimensional. It lifts, pivots over, and then lowers the load. So top left shows it lifting the load, and bottom right shows it lowering the load. That's all I have for fuel movement. Does anybody have any questions on fuel? Yes, sir.
Yes, hi, Rich. Couple of questions. So these are questions I get asked a lot, so I'm going to punt and ask you the same questions, right? So one is about high burn-up fuel. People are concerned that, high burn-up has a greater thermal load, and there had been thought to need longer time in the spent fuel pool.
Right.
And you're taking out earlier than had previously been done. So can you explain a little bit how you do that?
So when we look at the fuel, right, we actually do fuel load studies for each cask. Holtec developed what's called the Metamic Insert, which allows us to cask higher burn-up fuel in a more timely fashion. So because of that methodology, we're able to load fuel faster than you could in previous years.
What was the magic insert, and can you explain how it works?
It's Metamic.
Metamic.
Metamic. It's a special metal that was developed by Holtec.
Okay. What does it do?
It absorbs heat faster, right? It will absorb, not faster, but it absorbs more heat than a regular steel configuration.
No, so it conducts the heat away.
Yeah,
Right. Okay. So the second question I have is about damaged fuel.
damaged fuel.
Yeah. Do you have much damaged fuel in the spent fuel?
There are some damaged fuel assemblies, but we got to be careful on how we classify those. Sometimes damaged fuel might have been because we didn't have a chance to do fuel sipping, right, for some reason or another.
What does that mean?
When we sip the fuel, we look for any degradation in the fuel itself for any leakers. So
Okay.
there are some assemblies we weren't able to do that for one reason or another in the past. There is one of the license amendment requests that talks about casking damaged fuel with primary sources. So that LAR has been submitted to the NRC for review and approval.
Okay. So does that mean for now you can't cask damaged fuel?
I can't
Until you
cast
get that
fuel.
amendment?
Right now, I can't cast that fuel until I get approval from the NRC.
Okay. And can you just briefly explain how it's done? If you have damaged fuel, how do you do that versus the normal
Well,
load?
damaged fuel, right, could be a grid strap. Could be a grid strap that's kind of mislodged, right? It could be, there's no question that we can lift any of the filled fuel assemblies. We know we can do that because we've done that in the past, right? Again, so it could be a grid strap that's maybe loose. It could be, again, for some reason or another, a reason why we didn't sip the fuel to begin with, right? I can go through some other, I can get back to you with some other of the failures that we are seeing, but that's basically it.
Okay. I'd appreciate it if you're going to.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Get the failures that you see and and the methodology you use to still cask it, even with those failures. That would be great.
Richard, 1 second. This is Tom Congdon. Could you just give a sense for what percentage of the assemblies you're seeing
I think
that
there's
are
12 assemblies total.
12 total out of, so percentage-wise, that's
12 out of the
Yeah.
number that I gave, out of a couple thousand.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's not like it's 70, 80, or 100 fuel assemblies. It's
Okay.
about 12 to 13.
Thanks, Tom. That was a good question.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thanks, Rich.
Any other questions on fuel? Okay. Vessel segmentation is really our second critical path, right? We want to try to time this to be completed by the October 23 timeframe. It may go past that a little bit, but that's kind of our goal right now.
Excuse me, Rich, just before you dive in, layperson terms, try to explain in the most basic terms what vessel segmentation is
Okay.
for the general
gonna-
audience.
We're gonna take apart the reactor, right? We're gonna actually cut it with a gantry, a saw configuration that will start with cutting up the internals, right? The core barrel, if anybody remembers baffle bolts and baffle plates, right? That was a huge issue a few years ago. All that money we invested in getting those prepared, we're now going to cut the internals of the vessel itself, right? We'll also cut off the tops of the vessel head itself, right? All of that gets cut. It goes into specific canisters, right? And depending on what level of radionuclide it is, it could be level alpha waste, Bravo Charlie, or greater than Class C, right? That'll determine what we do with that, those segmentations of components within the reactor vessel itself. So basically, it's just cutting up the internals of the reactor and the top works also. That's what it comes down to.
Yep.
And
you.
Rich, that's done underwater
It's all done underwater.
with a very
It's all done
sharp saw? Because I did see it when we went to Vermont, we were able to see that on a monitor of how they were doing the vessel segmentation.
Yeah,
It's
so we
pretty
have some
interesting.
pictures, some preliminary pictures of the saw structure that was starting to install in Unit 3. All right, so we'll get to those pictures. But just to clarify also, for the vessel itself, that may have to be cut dry, right? Because we could only flood, the cavity, right? And after we flood the cavity, which is where the vessel sits, right? Eventually, we're gonna have to lift it and cut it dry. And we'll do that in rings. It's a whole process on how we do that.
And Rich, does this generate radioactive water
I'm sorry?
Is the water that will be residual, that you use to flood up, will that become radioactive?
Can't hear.
Will the question from Richard Webster is, will the water that you use to flood the vessel become radioactive?
It's the same water that we use now that we have used for refueling operations.
Okay.
So it's going to be no more radioactive than it is right now.
Right. And do you recycle it after you flood up the vessel to cut it up? Do you then recycle the water or store it somewhere?
I'm sorry.
Is the water once you've used it for the underwater segmentation work that you're performing after the flooding, what do you do with that water that is now radioactive?
Yeah, that's okay. So it'll be processed just like we process water now, right? We do not dump to the river, we discharge to the river. And we discharge through a series of filtering networks, a series of holding tanks, and a series of monitoring operations, right? We do that now. We've done that in the past, right? Normal plant operation, we've done that normally. And between the spent fuel pools, and the reactor cavity, which will get its water from the refueling water storage tank, right? It'll be no different. The discharge of that water to the Hudson River will be no different than what we've done years past. I have a slide. I guess there's some questions later on, Q&A.
Yes.
Right? And we'll go through the details. I can go through the details of what we discharge, what we're allowed to discharge, and our requirements prior to discharge. We could do that now or later.
No, I think we save that for later because I
Okay.
want to keep you on the schedule. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so, Richard, did that answer your questions?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So where are we? Unit 2, we had to develop a transport system to remove big and heavy equipment out of the containment building. We've removed the steam generator steam domes to the rad pen, and I'll explain to you why we did that. We did that at Unit 2. We continued removing additional cavity interferences, and we completed cutting the RCS loops. So what we want to do is isolate the reactor vessel itself. So we'll cut the 4 hot legs, we'll cut the 4 cold legs, we weld them, and then the vessel itself is isolated from the rest of the reactor cooling system. Right? And then we remove the old equipment hatch, and we'll show you that also. So through the end of September, We'll install cover plates in the reactor cavity, right, to ensure that there's no leakage in the cavity itself. We're going to prep the cavity for flood up. We're going to actually apply a coating within the cavity itself to ensure there's no leakage. That's on top of the plates that we install and weld. And then we will receive and start installation of the gantry source structure in the reactor cavity. And I'll show you that some pictures following Unit 3's description. Next slide. So in Unit 3, we did complete the transport system, and we removed the steam generator steam domes from Unit 3 also. We completed the segmentation team training, so we actually have a team of individuals that are going to do the cutting. They were up in Canada, I want to say roughly a month, just training on the new saw technique. It's actually a 72-inch, 60-inch, and a 40-inch saw blade that's going to do the cutting of the vessel itself. That tooling has been shipped or starting to get shipped to the site. And in Unit 3, we completed the RCS loop gapping, or the isolation of the vessel itself. And then we started the gantry saw support structure installation in the reactor cavity. And I'll show you pictures of that. Through September, we'll complete the weld inspections of the RCS plugs. Right, so we have to go through a formal weld inspection program. Right, we'll do die penetrant testing and also do visuals. We'll complete the gantry source support structure. We'll install the support platforms. I'll show you what that is. And then we're actually going to flood up the cavity, and there's a high potential we'll start segmentation activities prior to September 22nd of this month, which is the next meeting. So if we go to the next picture, right? Top left, if you look beyond the steam generator dome, you can see the enlargement we made to the containment building itself. That was done with a diamond wire cutting, with water cooled, had negative pressure on the containment building. So between that, we maintained very little exposure to silica or dust in the area. Reason why we had to make that hatch that big was to remove the steam domes and then remove subsequent larger components from containment, pressurizer, accumulator tanks, so on and so forth. Right, so we put this rail system that went up to and into the building, all right, and then it's called a Goldhofer. It's a rig that can transport heavy loads, right? It backs up into the rail system itself, and we transport the steam generator domes into a rad pen, which is the next picture. So this rad pen is where we're holding those right now. We're doing some last minute checks, but they're all steam cleaned. I mean, PWRs are clean steam plants, right? So these are the secondary side of that steam function, right? They'll be ready for free release. In fact, we've got to put a schedule together, but this metal will be cut up and sold. It's not radioactive, right? So what you see there is 1, 2, 3. There's actually 8 there now, 4 from Unit 2, 4 from Unit 3. Next slide. This shows the plugs that we put in for the reactor vessel itself. All right, this was not welded out yet in these pictures, but they're totally welded out now, and we're doing the inspections that are required. Next slide. So this is the beginnings of the gantry saw that I talked about, SAW, that I talked about previously, right? It's a robust structure. It goes within the cavity itself, all right? And then as we build it, we could see how we would cut the reactor up. But when I talked about the coating, you could see the steel plates on the bottom. If you go to the picture on the right, that white plate is a piece of steel that we put down on the bottom of the cavity. And then underneath that and up the walls, we're spraying this coating on to ensure that we have no leakage out of the cavity itself. So next slide. So the reason why we cut the domes, right, is it'll make it just about level with what was called the bioshield wall. So from that bioshield wall, we'll actually make platforms. And those platforms will support 2 cranes, right? And those cranes will assist on taking out, well, as we cut the vessel within the cavity, we will put those pieces in containers. So those cranes will assist on removing the containers out of containment. We'll put it on the gold hopper eventually and then bring it to a rad pen, and I'll show you those pictures coming on. But that's basically the reason why we cut the steam domes, was to provide us with a working platform for the workers to manipulate the saw itself. He'll have a control station on one of the platforms, and then to also be able to remove the containers out of the reactor cavity. That's all I have for segmentation, unless anybody has a question.
First, I want to thank you for the tour.
Dave, can you just
Dave
mention your name?
Lockbaum.
Thank you.
First, I want to appreciate the tour that you gave me this, and I apologize again for showing up late.
That's okay.
But several other plants, instead of doing vessel segmentation, like San Onofre Unit 1 and Trojan, ship the entire reactor vessel off. What are the advantages of vessel segmentation versus that?
I don't think we can in the case of Unit 2 and 3. Just think the dose maybe, and maybe the size is just too big.
So that's an advantage.
Yeah,
It's the only way to go.
potentially, we're looking at Unit 1, and potentially at Unit 1, there is a possibility we could ship it out whole, but we haven't gotten there yet. We haven't gotten that far yet.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions on segmentation? I don't want to sound like I'm going too fast, but we're good?
Good,
All
thank
right.
you.
Next slide is really what we're working on for building demolition. If you remember the site all the years ago, right, we had these huge oil tanks that were actually used for Units 1 and 2, secondary heating of the plant. We were able to take those tanks down in addition to the pump house that was in between the 2 tanks. So that's all been removed. We're working on levelizing all of that property now. We also took down 3 basic metal enclosures, and what that's going to allow us to do is provide us with an area where we can store Alpha and Bravo Charlie waste containers until we can ship them off site. That's the intent there. Projected through September, the condensate storage tank, we're looking at that. That has to come down eventually for the asphyxie pad that I was talking about before. If we get to that before September, I'm not sure yet. That job has to go out to bid. The same thing with the Energy Education Center Theater. We're looking at that also. We may have to take that down also. But those jobs are kind of up for bid, so I don't know if we're going to get those done by September. Really, we want to start focusing really on Unit 2's fuel and making sure that we have no issues there.
I'm sorry, could you just repeat, what is the CST?
Condensate storage tank. No longer used.
Rich, the
All right,
energy,
so the building demo, this is what I want to
Excuse me, Rich, Mayor Knickerbocker has a
I
question.
just had a quick question. The Energy Education Theater, is that where the,
It's the glass building.
the react, but is that where the control panels, like to teach the,
Years ago, Edison used the building as an education center for people to come in.
oh, okay.
And the back end of it, right, is concrete, but underneath, because they use that like almost as an amphitheater, but underneath that was a theater,
Oh, okay.
right? So that appears to be in the way of the vehicle barrier fence that we have to put in. So we're looking at, do we really need to take that down, or could we change the vehicle barrier fence? Well, eventually the building will come down. We just don't know if we need to do that right away.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay.
I just wanted to clarify.
Oh,
that.
my pleasure. All right, so top left, that's the remnants of the tanks being taken down. But really what I wanted to show you was bottom right. That was the small pump house building. It was cement. So there's a lot of methods on how to take down a cement building, right? We've talked about tenting, we've talked about diamond wire cutting, but I've talked to a lot of construction folks And classically, what we do is we wet down the cement to minimize any dust generation. We watched the whole thing. The wetting down of the cement really worked fine. So that's a method that we'll use in the future, that we'll consider in the future as we go through our building or demo permit process. Next slide is really the metal buildings we took down. At the end of the day, that's really where our RAD pen will be, where we'll store the Class A and Class Bravo Charlie waste containers. Anything else on building demo?
Quick question, just to clarify.
Just state your name, please.
Richard Webster. Quick question. I'm not understanding it. There's talk of a building permit, a demo permit coming up. So, do you have a demo permit? Do you need a what demo do you need? What demo activities need a permit?
Any building that comes down, we go to the village, right, and we get the demo permit. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, but I'm still confused because I thought Mr. Turo was saying that there's a demo permit under
The
consideration.
demo permits come through the village.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe Kelly, we can explain a little further. There are DEC regs that deal with dust in any kind of site application, any kind of construction type activity. And the village is incorporating the DEC regs as part of their village permit on building demolition. So maybe Kelly could expand on that a bit.
Thank you, Tom. This is Kelly Turturro. I think, though, what Richard might be asking is why was the pump house demolished without a demo permit in place? Is that what you were asking?
Well,
we
I'm-
had a demo permit.
Right. I guess I'm not quite understanding the situation with permitting. Is this a demo permit that doesn't have the DEC requirements in it
Oh,
right
okay.
now? or-
I understand your question now. Thank you. The DEC does not have jurisdiction over demolition of buildings. That is within the village's jurisdiction. So the village would have issued a permit for that activity.
I think, Richard, what we're now doing, right, in advance of the larger demo projects, is we are preemptively requiring Holtec, the village, is requiring Holtec to comply with the DEC regs that DEC does not itself require a permit for, but could enforce the terms of should there be a dust problem, right? So the DEC regs control that no dust can leave the site and create a nuisance type activity, right? So if there were a problem, DEC could come in and do some type of enforcement. What we're saying in a sort of preemptive way, working with the village in their permitting jurisdiction for demolition, is that as a condition for obtaining the village demo permit, the company has to agree that they're complying with the DEC regs.
Okay.
So it's a sort of preemptive move that under normal circumstances wouldn't require a DEC permit. We're folding those regs and those requirements for dust control and mitigation into the village demo permit. Kelly, did I capture that? I don't want to misstate the
Yes,
DEC jurisdiction.
that's right. Thank you for clarifying that, Tom.
Okay, so if I'm understanding right, then the village demo permits in the future will be improved from the current demo permits.
In that they would
that they'll
incorporate,
incorporate
right?
the
And
DEC
up
requirement.
until this date, the type of demolition that they've been doing are of the oil tank metal building variety that, haven't been the things that are of most concern from a dust standpoint. So we're ahead of doing anything on the thick concrete wall type structures.
All right, thank you.
Can I?
Yeah, Supervisor?
yeah.
I'm sorry, Superintendent.
Thank you.
Hyde-Ryder.
And that's a question I have because that has been the number one question we've been fielding from parents about tenting, about demolition, so on and so forth. So I just want to get it straight. I know, Rich, you're not sure whether you're going to tent yet. That's a decision that hasn't been made. It appears tenting is not part of the DEC requirements that the village may adopt as part of its permitting process. Is that correct?
That's correct. DEC regulations don't have any specific requirements on tenting. The requirements that we're talking about are generally these public nuisance standards that Tom mentioned. that would be layered into the village demolition permit, but nothing specific on tinting, no.
So if we were to agree that tenting is another mitigation layer, that would reside with the village to make that determination as to whether the village, whomever makes that decision, wants to require that as part of permitting. And if a permit is not given to Holtec, that function doesn't take place at that time.
I would let Teresa answer that question on behalf of the village, but it wouldn't be something that DEC could
Okay.
require.
To answer your question, our building inspector, our building department is the one who would be issuing the demo permits. And so there's been permits that have been issued, but like Tom had said, they're just regular metal buildings or, just simple buildings for demo. So going forward, we're going to talk to the DEC about incorporating their requirements or what their rules are, and then going forward, we have to figure out a few things.
So just, I think to put just a clarifying point on all of this, the DEC regs put the requirement on the site owner to ensure that dust doesn't become a problem and leave the site. The mitigation measure they use to accomplish that is up to them. But if the mitigation measure isn't working and it was built into the permit, there's an enforceability element here that we now can utilize. Is that a fair
That's correct.
characterization? So it's not that there's a mitigation measure that gets required as a permit condition. The issue is simply that they can't do any kind of activity that creates a dust problem. So they have to develop the right mitigation strategies to avoid the problem, and the permit says that. If there is a problem, you can enforce the permit. Okay, thank you. And, we will also be, as the state, even though it's not our permit, we have eyes on the ground now with Cliff Chapin, having started as the resident inspector, can be monitoring all this kind of activity. Cliff will be knowledgeable about the permits issued at the local level. Should he see something that requires the village's attention, he can do that. He can play that role. Okay?
Sounds good.
I'm sure you're really pleased to hear all of this. But Rich, I think it's just, you know the expectations, right? You know the expectations
Absolutely.
are that there
we will
cannot be a
depend
dust
on-
problem.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Which means that you've got to develop the right mitigation strategies to avoid that problem.
That's all.
And we're going to have built-in conditions to ensure that that is enforceable, and we'll have eyes on the ground to follow through.
Understood. We will depend on the expertise of the contractor on how to mitigate dust, right? We can hose down a building, we can do diamond wire cutting like we've demonstrated, right? And all of that will be part of the process and the plan.
We're running just a little bit over, but I want to let you finish. You've got another slide or two. If we could wrap up, and I think there's
We've
one or two more
discussed,
questions before the public forum. Yep.
LARs and exceptions. I don't know if we want to discuss it any further.
Well, actually, Tom Carey was on. He was trying to ask a question earlier, actually related to the cyber request.
Yeah.
So Tom's, let me just pull it up. His question for Rich Baroni, sorry. Wouldn't there still be a cybersecurity concern regarding valve manipulation on valves for both spent fuel storage pools and the gas lines? Obviously, the gas lines are not part of your
that would be in.
license amendment request, but we can talk about that with Enbridge when they're at the table. But for his question on the valves for the spent fuel pools.
Yeah, but simply, there's no critical digital asset, right, that's tied to the internet for decommissioning purposes. And that's really the basis behind why we do not need the cyber requirements any longer from a decommissioning perspective. What we will do is this, right? Let's say the fuel transfer crane that's in the Unit 2 spent fuel pool does have a digital component to it, right? And sometimes we have to hook up a computer or a thumb drive, right, to get that digital aspect working. we have procedures in place and an IT department in place, right, that will verify that the component that's tying into the asset, right, will be clean. And it takes hours, sometimes it takes days to make sure that the laptop has no viruses on it, or the thumb drive we'll use to update a program has no virus on it. We'll continue to do that, right? But from a decommissioning perspective, there's really no critical digital asset tied to the internet, right? And therefore, as a result, we don't need those cybersecurity rules. That's kind of the basics of what it comes down to.
Thank you. Tom Carey also had another question back on the segmentation. What craft is involved with cutting of the vessel, and are they EPRO certified riggers? Any certificates at all?
I'd have to check. I have to get back to you. Most of it probably, I'm assuming it's going to be iron workers, but I'd have to check and get back to you to make sure.
Okay.
I'll do that.
Thank you.
Mr. Congdon?
Yes.
I had a quick question for
Yeah.
Mr. Baroni. Colin Smith, County Legislator.
Hey, how are you?
doing, sir? Just to touch back on the cybersecurity question, you said there's no critical digital asset that's tied to the internet. Just so I understand what that means, so none of the systems, nothing that's operating any of the critical machinery, equipment, systems, anything of that nature, none of that has an internet component that would be of any concern with respect to cybersecurity? Is it all, it's like, are we talking everything is self-contained? Just, could you flesh that out just a little bit more for me?
Trying to think. Let's say we had a safety injection system that was totally operable while the plant was operating. I don't need that safety injection system anymore. There's no fuel in the reactor, right? So if there was a digital component associated with that, I don't need to maintain the cybersecurity rule for that component. It's no longer in service, it's no longer used. So that's the whole basis behind the LAR.
Okay.
Does that help?
That helps, yes.
All right, good.
Thank you.
So Richard, did you want to just give a quick update on that fault condition? And then,
Yeah, 13 Whiskey 93, that's just a Con Ed designation for our 13.8 kV feeder to Unit 3 from the Buchanan switchyard. We use that for in-house power. A couple weeks ago, a failure was observed to be a short condition, so the cable short. 13 Whiskey 92, which normally feeds Unit 2, is then modified through switching on site to supply both units. So we excavated the cable, repaired the short, and just put the cable back in service.
what contingencies were in place during the time of the repair?
Contingencies in place, well, when we excavated the cable, it was all by hand, right? So that's a must. Then
I mean the power contingencies.
Power contingencies, we have emergency diesels at both units that are, I'll call them operable, but they're ready to go. We have Appendix R diesels, they're ready to go. We had diesel backup power in case it was needed.
Okay. Any questions on the fault repair? From DOB members? Yes?
Different topic.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Is that okay?
Sure.
I just wondered
Just
if
state
you
your name,
could.
please.
Sandy Galiff. I just wondered if you could tell us any progress between Holtec and Enbridge about your emergency planning?
Holtec and who, I'm sorry, Sandy?
And
Enbridge.
Enbridge?
Enbridge. Yeah. John Sheridan and I have a good working relationship. We talk often. There is a quarterly meeting that we have, I think, with New York State, right? And we go through any issues that one of the three of us may have. John and I came up with an MOU on crossing the 26 and 30-inch gas lines. We're also working on, through his engineering staff, a subterranean type of air bridge that it's in the infant stages of being developed, but it's somewhere we want to go because we're going to be using that road for a long time. And that's the road, it's the Overlook Road that we put the air bridge on. So I would say our relationship with Enbridge is fine.
Can you just explain a little bit further what you just said, subterranean?
Yeah,
Subterranean.
so Overlook Drive, it's called. It's the road
Right.
that goes from the main entrance right to the generation support building, right? And over that road, trucks will go over it as
Right.
well as passenger cars, right? So the concern was the 26 and 30-inch lines would be subjected to heavy loads, right? And then we'll have an issue. So what we did was we mimicked an air bridge, which was steel plates that we put over the lines, and it was 1-inch plates on the ground, bridged over with a 2-inch plate, right? And what that does is allow heavy loads, I think up to 367,000 pounds, to go over the air bridge without any issues with the gas line. What we'd like to do eventually is do away with the steel plates, right, and go subterranean, just go underneath the ground and probably do some type of air bridge there. So my engineering staff is working with John's. It's really infant stages. We looked at a price. My boss is willing to go for that, and I can't tell you when that's going to happen, but I could tell you that we're looking at it, and we really want to get it done.
Right, because the bridge, I think you did in February, March, didn't you?
Earlier.
I mean, I saw
We
it.
discussed, yeah.
Right.
That's the same bridge that we're.
It's the same bridge.
Same bridge, yeah.
So,
We want to enhance it. We instead of going over steel plates all the time, if we can enhance it and go subterranean, it might be a better idea.
okay, so you can get on with that real soon?
Yeah.
And
So
tell
basically,
us?
it's just a tunnel.
Huh?
So it's a tunnel that you'll bring.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the details yet. I know the engineers are just about talking about it, but I think it's important for us to do that. And we have the backing by Holtec Senior Management, which I was happy to say.
Okay, we are a bit over, and I'd like to get to the public forum portion. Last call for questions on Rich's presentation. Thank you, Rich. You can stay at the table, please.
Oh, great.
For the next portion of the meeting. And I'd like to invite John Sheridan from Enbridge to join us at the table, please. And Bridget Freimeyer from the Department of Public Service. Welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome. I'd also like to introduce Tony Belcito. Tony is an administrative law judge at the Department of Public Service, and Tony's going to be moderating the public forum for us this evening. Next slide, Tom. We received a lot of good questions from the public in advance of tonight's meeting. We were then able to organize those questions into topic areas. There were a number of folks who had asked the same or very similar questions, and so we're packaging those together. We'll call up all of the individuals who submitted those questions so that each of them will have an opportunity to ask a follow-up or clarifying question if necessary. The pre-submitted questions are going to be read aloud by Tony, and the guest panelists will then respond, and then, as I said, the moderator will then afford questioners an opportunity to reply. In order for all the individuals to get the opportunity to have their questions heard, the moderator may ask that some of the discussions be paused so we can get to as many questions as possible tonight. We're going to get to as many of the questions as we can on the pre-submitted questions first. We did continue to receive questions through the weekend and to this week. We tracked those. We have them. If there is time, we will get to them. If not, we commit to answering those questions in writing as we've done in previous meetings. Next slide. These are the general topic areas for tonight's forum and the order in which we will be taking them. And with that, I'd like to ask Tony to take the mic and start the public forum.
All right, thank you very much, Tom. And I'm just going to go ahead and start reading questions. Once we get through each question for each topic area, I will call the folks who asked those questions either to the mic in person or we'll unmute you virtually. And if you have any follow-up questions, or, you know, if your question was answered to your satisfaction, we'd love to hear that as well. All right, the first question is, I would like to make a recommendation for a presentation on nuclear harvesting to submit samples for autopsy to assess effects of exposure to radiation on reactor components, structural materials, and other related materials for embrittlement and other impacts of aging and long-term exposure to radiation, and suggest a September 2022 meeting.
So, okay, this is Tom Congdon. I'll take the first shot at that. We are open to agenda items and expert presentations for future meetings. I can't commit to the timing, but this is an area that we would certainly consider for a future meeting. With that, I'd also like to ask Dave Lockbaum if he'd like to say a few things on this topic.
Yeah, this is Dave Lockbaum. I have looked at that issue, and in fact, I was working with a group on intervening on peach bottoms license renewal, trying to get more formal harvesting. Harvesting has been done at some plants. The Zion plant in Illinois, as it was being decommissioned, some cables were extracted for the purposes of determining what the aging was or was not. Other plants in Spain have also had concrete and other materials taken away to see how neutron embrittlement or radiation embrittlement affected them, in addition to just normal rusting and other aging mechanisms. So there's a wealth of information out there that could lend itself to a presentation at some future date if the need arose.
Thank you, Dave.
I'd like to add one thing. We are having EPRI come in, which is the Electric Power Research Institute. They will be on site, I think, within a month. They want to take what's called a boat sample. It's really a metal sample of the Unit 2 pressurizer, right? And for that same reason, they want to look at the effects of radiation on the pressurizer. We're also working with Westinghouse. They come and kind of go. Sometimes they want components, sometimes they don't. We have to nail them down. But there are people that are coming to us asking for these type of harvesting. So, and we'll cooperate as much as possible.
Thank you, Rich.
Thank you. The next question under the administrative topic is, when will a permanent appointment of a community representative who resides in the local community be made?
Again, this is Tom Congdon. I'm the chair of the Decommissioning Oversight Board. We've had some discussions about this at previous meetings. We understand the interest within the community to have more representation on the DOB. There are a number of folks, I think, in the community who've been active on these issues for a long time. There are a number of different perspectives. I think it would be difficult to just choose one community member for the board, but we are totally in favor of greater public participation in our meetings, and what we've done to try to improve on that, we started this at the last meeting, is we've started a policy of inviting guest speakers who can come give a presentation from the community perspective on a given topic, and then have back and forth with DOB members and our experts. I thought that worked well at the last meeting. We had Courtney Williams. We really appreciated her presentation and the long dialogue that we had with her, and I thought that was a good discussion. And we look forward to inviting other members of the community to do something similar at future meetings. Today's meeting is another policy shift that we've taken, which is to have a longer public forum dedicated to having a back and forth with community members rather than a straight one-directional public statements that are read into the record that we then take and try to respond to in writing. So I feel that, and I think I can speak for the DOB, that we want to be responsive to the community questions and ideas. We've gotten a lot of great ideas from the community to improve our processes, and I think we've adopted something like 95% of the ideas that have been submitted to us, improving the website, improving the process of the meetings, and we really greatly appreciate the level of feedback and the level of participation that we get. And again, you know, we're gonna be doing some outreach for the September meeting, find the next community guest speaker, and you know, we'll do more of these public forums as well in the future. So that's our plan.
All right, there's one more question related to administrative, and then I'll call the individuals who asked these questions up to see if there's any follow-up. What accounts for the delay in the appointment of a consistent Enbridge representative to the DOB, and when will that be rectified?
So primarily, this is the Decommissioning Oversight Board. We are dedicating a lot of our time on the agendas to the whole tech activities. Obviously, there's been regular concerns expressed about the co-location of the pipeline. We've had a guest expert speaker on pipeline, Dr. Kuprowitz. Enbridge has appeared before. We've had PHMSA appear to deal with the pipeline issues. And I'm sure we will be inviting Enbridge again. Enbridge is here tonight. Thank you for your participation. But I don't think that it's necessary to have Enbridge at every single meeting. I think we meet in terms of our oversight activities. Rich mentioned before that there are quarterly meetings that we are doing under the JP with the state. Enbridge and Holtec are in regular communications even outside of those quarterly meetings, but the state is convening at least on a quarterly basis, and we are present with our gas safety staff and our nuclear team at those meetings to ensure that all issues are being discussed and all activities planned and contemplated by Holtec are understood by Enbridge, so that should there be any issues of concern that require mitigation or a delay in something that potentially could impact the pipeline, that communication is ongoing. So that's happening. So I know that that's not something that is visible to the public who tune in for these meetings, but that's ongoing on a quarterly basis. And as needed, I think, a couple of times a year, we will definitely be inviting Enbridge and PHMSA to future meetings of the DOB. Thanks, John.
All right, thank you. This is the hardest part of my job, is trying to pronounce names correctly, so please correct me when I mess them up. But I will remind folks that for the follow-up questions, we ask that you stay on the topic related to the question that you asked, because we do have a lot of topics to cover. And for folks who did ask several questions, you will have an opportunity for follow-up with those other questions as well. But first, virtually, we will call Susanna Glidden. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. I believe so, yes. Susanna, if you're on, and if you have any follow-up questions, please let us know.
No, I don't have any follow-up on these.
Excellent, thank you. And then Ellen Weininger. Do we find Ellen to unmute her?
Perhaps it's a good idea to tell us that at the bottom of the screen, we have to click on unmuting ourselves and video.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me now.
Yes.
Thank you. So I do have follow-up, and thank you again for asking my questions, asking these questions, and for providing an opportunity to have follow-up. With regard to the question about the community representative, I'm trying to understand why a community representative is not a permanent, non-rotating position, and why such an inferior status is given to community members who live in the immediate area and who bear the greatest risk from all these operations at the site. I don't see any other position on the DOB that's a rotating position within each of these agencies and entities, unions, all these various representatives. And yet, the community representation is relegated to this much lower status, and yet they bear the greatest risk. And the other part is, essentially, it's discriminatory against a community that is a frontline community that is one of the most environmentally overburdened in New York State, and that's also been cited, as a disadvantaged community as part of the scoping plan from the Climate Action Council. So New York State's climate law is seeking to address environmental injustice, and here we are. That's the part that is so puzzling, is why rotate? Why not have a permanent representative as everyone else on the DOB? And in terms of, well, I'll let you follow up with that, and then I have a quick follow-up on the other question.
Sure. Look, I appreciate the question, and I understand the concern. When we formed this body, it is unique in the nation, in that the relevant state agencies that have some state-level oversight jurisdiction are being pulled together in a manner where we can coordinate our activities. We can conduct our meetings in public so that we can share our oversight activities and observations with the members of the public, and directly hear from you the concerns that have actually and frankly helped us through the various meetings that we've already had. We take the feedback seriously, and it has made a difference in the kind of oversight that the state is doing. On the oversight board, in addition to the state agencies with jurisdiction, we have every level of elected officials in New York State represented here, from the village mayor to the town supervisor to the 2 county legislators to the county executive's office, the state assembly, and the state senate. We have the school district represented, and all of these folks are elected by you. And you are the community members that have elected these officials to represent your interests. I think they do an excellent job on the DOB in doing so. And it makes it easy for us to identify representatives of the community because you've elected them. For there to be another community representative on the board, when there are so many diverse points of view within the community, I think it would be very difficult for us to just pick one. And so what we're trying to do, in fairness and for equity purposes, is to allow for multiple voices to be heard on a regular basis through this guest speaker type of protocol that we've established, as well as having more public forum opportunities like this where we can hear from a larger number of you. So that's the approach we've taken, and I appreciate that there might be a difference in opinion about the best approach. This is the way we've chosen to organize ourselves.
And Ms. Monitor, if you have a brief follow-up, another brief follow-up, I'll let you go ahead, but we do have other questions to get to
Right.
tonight.
I want to get to my next follow-up on the next question, and thank you for your response. But my position has been stated and remains the same. A responsible person can represent the entire community. In terms of the other question, what accounts for the delay in the appointment of a consistent Enbridge representative to the DOB? I think that goes hand in hand with on-site supervision. So I'll try to, piece it together in the same fashion. PHMSA has a guidance, operations and maintenance enforcement for pipelines right-of-ways, and requiring supervision, on-site supervision, not quarterly meetings and not, phone calls, but on-site supervision. And it's always very disconcerting to see everything that's actually going on at the site. And
Ms. Weinger, if you could get to the question, please.
so the question is, PHMSA has guidance on this, and it seems, has guidance on on-site supervision, and consistent with on-site supervision is representation that is integral to the DOB, which does not meet every week or every month, but does meet every few months. So it's sort of dovetails. So I'm just trying to tie the two together because of the PHMSA guidance. around the pipeline operator and the pipeline rights of way. And
Okay, I still haven't heard a question. I'm sorry if I'm misunderstanding you.
yeah, I'm trying to understand, given the PHMSA operations and maintenance enforcement guidance on pipeline right of ways, and the need for on-site supervision, and that also being aligned with consistent representation with the DOB, because the DOB meets periodically, whether it's quarterly.
Okay, I'm sorry. So is the question, given
I'm tying it
the
together that there is guidance around supervision and on-site supervision by the pipeline operator. And I see this as an alignment with what is happening. We're having a discussion right here about an air bridge as an example. It so happens Enbridge is here. but
Ms.
that's-
Weininger, you're starting to go far afield, I think, again.
Again.
What is the
just
question?
looking-
Whether Enbridge should have a representative on the DOB? And whether that complies with recommendations from PHMSA?
I'm saying that that guidance seems to, align with the need for that kind of appointment.
Okay.
And we have no other precedent for a nuclear facility and the co-location of pipelines, but we do have guidance regarding on-site supervision for activities and operations around right-of-ways for pipelines.
Okay. I appreciate that statement. We're going to move on to the next follow-up question. In person, I believe we have Manna Joe Green, who also asked an administrative question. If we have you listed incorrectly and you don't have a follow-up question at this point, that's fine as well.
I don't have a follow-up question. I'm not real clear about what Holtec is doing in regard to actually sending or designating material for nuclear autopsy. I think it's going to take a whole presentation to sort this out. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, the next topic we have is workforce.
No, wait. I'm Margot Shephard, and I'm an in-person person who had a follow-up question.
Okay, related to administration.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
the-
yes. So, in
Go
terms
ahead.
of the community representative, I appreciate, the difficulty of, like, who to choose. But basically, in terms of the community, everyone here is appointed, it's part of their job, it's part of their public service. The people in the community who have been watchdogging, the nuclear activities, et cetera, have been doing it without pay, because of their own concern, and have acquired a humongous amount of knowledge over 30 years. So there is like an amazing resource out there, an institutional memory, even though it's not an institution, it's sort of like, there is an institutional memory among the activists and other people who have been going to these meetings for 20 and 30 years. But anyway, it really boils down to, in terms of everybody does not think the same. In terms of the community, you have people who are concerned or people who have concerns and a basis for their concerns because of information that they have. And then I guess you have people who don't have concerns.
Miss, did you have a question?
So my question is, can we have a slot? If we can't have a person appointed, can we have a slot so that in addition to the presentation and the guest speaker, et cetera, we have a kind of a community slot at every meeting to just sort of say, okay, we don't have a community representative sitting at the table, but now here's our community slot for the community concern of the day or the week or whatever.
Well, what our plan is for the community guest speaker to be the community slot in addition to the regular public statement portion of the meetings. We have roughly 3 hours for these meetings. It's really critically important, I think, for there to be presentations like we heard earlier today, where we are sort of level setting what the activities are on site, allowing the agencies to discuss that with other elected officials representing the community, discuss the types of activities and oversight activities that are happening, that have happened, that are happening, discuss the license amendments, where we are with comments, et cetera. Those are sort of business functions of this body that I don't want to lose, and we're going to need time to discuss those. We want to do that in public. And so we want the guest speakers. We want expert speakers to come, but that's not to the exclusion of the community guest speaker. We will likely have outside experts. A number of you have recommended, to bring in outside experts to make presentations for a discussion. We're going to continue to do that as well. So I think we're in agreement that there's going to be, a regular community guest speaker that's going to have an ability to ask questions and interact with the DOB. In addition, at each of those meetings going forward, there's still that public statement portion of the meeting. And during those public statement portions of the meeting, I know those aren't ideal for everyone because it's not a back and forth, but we want to try to get to as many folks as possible. So we're trying to balance all of this. We're trying to hear from
The
as
public
many.
statement portion of the meeting, it doesn't have the same weight as something being part of the agenda or like
Yeah,
a
no.
major concern that's kind of ongoing from the community.
Right, understood. But what that can do, though, is to the extent that issues weren't raised by the community guest speaker or that weren't on the agenda, as a number of you have been doing, to voice ideas for areas you'd like to have discussed at a future meeting. We want to hear that. Other questions that we will answer. If we don't have time tonight, we'll answer them in writing. But I want to just do a sort of process check with Tony, because we're half an hour into the public forum. We're only through one topic area. We really want to get to as much as we can. And the way Tony is setting this up is that on the topic area for the question, we identified the individuals who asked that question or similar questions to be called up for the clarifications and follow-ups. And so he'll name the individuals that we found in the question submissions, so that we can try to keep it organized and get to as many of the questions as
I understand that. I was just the first person on the list for that question, that's all.
Got it. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very, very much.
All right. The next topic is workforce. And the first question is, I would like to better understand what attempts Holtec is making to ensure labor peace at Indian Point.
All right, so I'll take that. So right now, there are 7 different unions that are working together at Indian Point. It's approximately 260 head count. Comes and goes, plus or minus 5, any one given week. We actually had 2 other unions on site when we were building the asphyxie pad. Those would be the lathers and a cement group. Right, all physical work is performed by a union craft. That's not a change. All work is performed either by agreement with the UWA contract, with the GPPMA, which is the General President's Agreement, or the National Labor Agreement. Representatives of the unions and the contractors, that's both Champion and Giordano, we meet once per month, right? And my decommissioning director, Frank Spagnolo, and I will go to the meeting first, and we'll ask if there's any issues, right? And then, pending what they say to us, we will leave the meeting, and then they talk amongst themselves, right? So from my perspective, I think we're doing pretty well with union peace on site. That's how I would answer that question.
All right. The next question. How will you ensure you retain employees for institutional memory and experience for safety?
That's a good question. So we developed a phase 1 organization when Entergy transferred the license over to Holtec. At that time, there were like 312 people. Right now, we're down to about 260. Again, all the operators were ex-Entergy employees, so they operate the plant. So that's been retained. Most of the upper management people, with maybe 1 or 2 people, are former Entergy people. And we plan on staying there through the duration. Newcomers that do come in, they do get trained on the site itself, right? It's a big site. They need to understand certain things through operations department. through our maintenance department. So we talk to them, they get trained, right? And critical positions are and will be maintained with experienced individuals.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi, everyone. Pete Harcum here. Rich, just a quick follow-up on the labor issue. We've had several conversations. We had a little incident a couple months ago that I think was really more of a communication issue about who is on site, who is getting called, and I think through those discussions there was a commitment just for more outreach and dialogue. Are you and your team reaching out to the trades, even those who may not be on site on a regular basis, but have been in the past and are kind of part of the Indian Point history? Are you continuing that dialogue?
Senator, I'll have to follow up with you on that. I think our dialogue with the unions is pretty good, but yeah, I agree. Maybe we need to enhance that, and I'll work on that. I'll give you that commitment.
All right, thanks. Happy to work with you on that.
Yep, no problem.
Thank you. And then for the folks who submitted questions related to workforce, if you have any follow-up questions, this is your chance. Vincent Albanese?
We're not seeing Mr. Albanese in the attendance list, presume.
Okay. And then in person, Sally Jane Gellert? All right, I don't see any hands. So we'll move on to the next topic, school monitoring. And the first question there is, where is the final version of the Columbia Environmental Study?
So I'll take that. We're in touch with Professor Hollander, who ran the clinic with the students to develop that study. They received some peer review feedback, and they are trying to incorporate that. At the end of the semester, with some vacations, et cetera, I think there were some delays, but we've certainly expressed an interest in getting the final version of that, and when we do, we will put it up on our website.
Next question. When will the monitoring plan for the schools be completed? When will there be a community presentation about it? And why was the Hendrick Hudson School District not discussed? Why has the Hendrick Hudson School District not discussed the recommendations for school monitoring with the public?
I can start, and then I'll turn it over to Joe Hochreiter. There's a subgroup of the DOB that is the school monitoring working group. We have met and discussed the report recommendations that were presented at our last DOB meeting. We continue to discuss an approach that we'd recommend and discuss at a future DOB meeting that we'd recommend for the school district to consider. I think if folks watched the presentation from the previous meeting or saw it online, they essentially had three options for recommendations, sort of a, they characterized them in terms of how expensive they were, kind of kind of least expensive, moderate, and higher expensive option. I think, they were recommending the middle option. I think that the early discussions we've had as a school monitoring working group are looking at enhancing that middle option to pull some of the things from the more expensive option in. But we'll finalize that, have a discussion at our September meeting where we can go over kind of what the recommended plan of action is, and then I'll turn it over to Joe.
Yeah, and in addition, David Lochbaum, who's sitting to Tom's left, a couple folks down, has agreed to continue his relationship consulting with district officials. So he met with us in mid-April and met with us for a couple hours and put together, I think, a little north of a 70-slide presentation to walk some of our district staff through some of the issues that we would confront and what some of the research says and what some of the best practices are. David has agreed to continue in that ad hoc capacity, and he'll do that after, as Tom said, the school monitoring group meets and after our fall DOB meeting as well. And then we anticipate that we'll roll out those recommendations and receive some community input later in the fall.
Thank you. Oh, yes, sir. Dave Lockbaum?
My name is Dave Lockbaum. Just to add to that, one of the things we're also trying to do is, I'm also on the board of advisors for the C10, the citizens group around Seabrook Nuclear Plant, New Hampshire, which has 18 continuous monitors around that plant. One of the things we're trying to do, one of the questions that came up from the school board and from the Capstone group is who maintains that system? And so we're trying to set up a meeting between the C10 folks that run their system and the working group that Tom mentioned to make sure that whatever equipment is purchased or whatever system is developed can actually be used and maintained and repaired and calibrated and so on. So we're trying to answer some of those questions to inform the decision about what is purchased and how it's used and who does it. So there is work in progress. It's not dropped and not fallen in a crack.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Dave.
The last question related to school monitoring is we need dust shields around work areas to protect surrounding community, especially nearby schools. How will you ensure this?
So this is Kelly Turturro from DEC. I'll take that question. As we've talked about before, there are layers of various government regulations, federal, state, and local regulations in place to limit the production and migration of dust during the decommissioning of the facility. The state will continue to promote tested and effective methods of dust mitigation. And as we've said before, we're actively working with both Westchester County and the Village of Buchanan to coordinate the oversight over dust mitigation through the demolition process. And I just want to reiterate what Tom said earlier as well. Now that there is a New York State resident inspector, that person will be on hand to observe real conditions in real time.
Thank you. Again, I'm going to call the folks up virtually first and then in person. I'll just remind folks that if you have a follow-up question, please ask it. Because we're trying to get to everyone's questions and get as much information exchanged here tonight, I ask that you hold your statements and your opinions to the extent they're not foundation for the question, and just ask any follow-up questions. Courtney Williams, virtually. Ms. Williams, are you on? And do you have any follow-up questions? You might have to unmute yourself on your end. So if you're speaking, we can't hear you.
Who are you trying to reach?
Courtney Williams? All right, we'll move on to Ellen.
Sorry, when I join as a panelist, it kind of kicks me out and I have to.
That's Courtney. Yeah. We heard you for a minute, Courtney, if you could try again.
Are there directions I can give her?
Here, going to move on to Ellen, so I stopped speaking.
Go ahead, Ms. Williams, I'm sorry.
I guess my question is, okay. Can you hear me?
You're breaking up.
I would recommend we move on to the next panelist. Courtney will begin to chat with you. It sounds like you may be having audio issues on your end.
Is it possible for Courtney to submit a chat? Courtney, if you'd like to submit a chat question, I'll be happy to read it in.
Am I being heard?
Your audio is not working. But if you can, submit a chat question. If not, we'll get the audio working for you.
Okay.
But at this point, we'll move on.
Sorry.
That's okay.
All right, I'll put it in the chat maybe. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you.
We'll move on to Ellen Weininger. Do you have a follow-up question related to school monitoring?
I would like to defer to Courtney Williams on this. I know she has a follow-up, and I'm eager to see the presentation for the school community and for the updated recommendations for the monitoring. So
Okay.
I'll defer to Courtney
Thank you.
further. Thank you.
Thank you. In person, we'll move to Dan Galinko. Mr. Galinko?
Thank you. Nice to see you all in person. I guess two basic questions. The first, based on the earlier discussion, you talked about demolition permitting. And so what does the enforcement actually look like to the extent that there's a finding or nuisance violation or whatever the case might be?
So I can speak from the Department of Environmental Conservation perspective, and I'm sorry I can't talk directly to you. I apologize that my back is to you. This is Kelly Turturro from DEC. What happens from the state perspective is if we determine that there is a violation of Department of Environmental Conservation regulations or the environmental conservation law, we will take an enforcement action against the violator. So what that looks like initially, typically, is the offer of what we call an order on consent. So that is a document that lays out the violations, requires a penalty, and also requires remediation of those violations. If the violator does not choose to settle violations with us, then we have to go through an administrative enforcement hearing process with them. So the department is required to put evidence forward. The respondent has an opportunity to challenge that evidence. Ultimately, an administrative law judge will make a recommendation, and the commissioner will actually issue a decision. That process, as you can imagine, can take some time. To get to the real point, our team, our staff, working with DPS, working with the communities, and in speaking with Holtec, will be present to ensure that if there is an issue, we are addressing it before we have to get to this enforcement process. It's important that we're flagging these things and we're addressing them immediately. And while we might have to go to enforcement because there is a violation and we need to collect a penalty and have some type of remedial schedule, it's important that we're addressing it quickly.
Yeah. If I may just add a point, what's unique about this, Dan, is that typically this reg at DEC is utilized after the fact. The violator may not even be aware of this reg, but they may have been doing some type of activity that was generating dust and creating a problem for their community. DEC gets complaints, and this reg allows them to do something about those complaints. In this instance, what is unique is that we're informing Holtec of these regs, and the village is telling Holtec, we're requiring you to comply with these regs as a condition of receiving our demo permit. What has transpired after informing Holtec of this plan by the village is that there have been meetings between Holtec and the DEC to understand the reg and understand the potential, penalties that could follow from violating them. And so it's unique in that we're doing all of this preemptively. And it's also very unique that we have a state person on site. Normally, business activity that could potentially violate this reg doesn't have an on-site presence of a state, enforcement entity, but we do.
Yeah, I guess what I would want to hear is that to the extent an activity, it's not the base plan that's going to create an emission or a safety issue, but 4,000 feet to the school means that to the extent that there is an accident or something going on, there needs, what I want to hear is there's a cease and desist ability within DEC or otherwise to stop an activity to the extent it's creating harm to the community.
And what I think you heard from Kelly, and I'll ask Rich to confirm, is that because they've been notified in advance of these regs and the requirements, if we're on site, we see a problem, it's going to be visible, and they're going to acknowledge the problem and be able to change course on the activity that they're working on that is creating a problem that could result in enforcement action. So that's what's unique in this relationship, is that there's a built-in awareness ahead of it. There's an expectation that's been set. We're on site, there can be a communication, and if there's a problem, I am sure that Holtec is going to agree that it needs to be remedied in real time. Rich, you want to confirm?
I agree.
Okay, great. And then I guess just the other point, maybe a bit of editorializing, but we had a base plan for monitoring in place. Obviously, Columbia came through and has some recommendations for some enhanced monitoring. I sort of shudder to think, absent, our town supervisor being able to put together this study with Columbia and Capstone Project, would we not have been in a place to be having this enhanced monitoring in place for some of the compounds and real-time monitoring that was not in existence before?
I guess, I'm sorry, what's the question?
So I guess it feels like, I hope we're not looking a little sort of flat-footed absent having had this Columbia study come together with the, happenstance that we have a Columbia professor in our community and town supervisor is able to get a study put together. So, I'm thankful that it came together, but, we're starting the school, year very shortly. There's demolition activities going on, and, I just want to see more proactivity.
You want to get the plan in place.
Yep.
Post haste. I agree, and I think the school agrees that we want to get it in place as soon as possible.
Yep.
So we're actively working, as you heard from Dave.
Thank you.
And then Sally Jane Gellert, in person? No. All right. Move on to the next topic.
Oh, excuse me, Tony, I'm sorry, but Courtney Williams was unable to
yeah,
ask her
I'm sorry,
question,
we
but
did get that question.
I do have it, so I'll just read it in. Thank you, Courtney, for sending it via chat. Her follow-up is, if the district will commit to a date for public meetings about school monitoring, and why was something this crucial left to students and those for whom this isn't a top priority? Demolition is happening now, yet we are still waiting for this report. Okay, well, I guess I'll start with the school monitoring working group was already working on this, so it wasn't as though we were relying on or waiting for this excellent resource from Columbia to come along. We established the school monitoring working group, I think after our first meeting of the DOB, and we've made presentations to the full DOB, and the plan all along, as we identified $500,000 out of the Entergy fund for the school, was to use the school monitoring working group with the assistance of Dave Lockbaum and other experts from state agencies to advise the school district on how best to use that $500,000. So all that was underway before the school came along, and I think when the school came along with this proposal, it would have been crazy for us to say no, and we really appreciate Supervisor Becker and Superintendent Hochreiter for facilitating that with Professor Hollander. And the other question, I guess, is for Joe. Will the school, will the district commit to a date for public meetings about school monitoring?
Yeah, we will when we receive the recommendations, and as I said earlier, we'll consult with Mr. Lockbaum to have him come back and meet with our board to help evaluate what those recommendations are, and the school working group, I'm sure, will have additional recommendations beyond just what the Columbia University students did. So when we unveil the plan and start to consult with our school community, we want to make sure we have all of the recommendations put forward, so we can receive input and feedback in totality rather than piecemeal.
And just as chair of the DOB, I'll commit to a presentation from the school monitoring working group at the September meeting.
Okay. All right, thank you. Next is spent fuel management. The first question is, why is breakneck speed of transferring rods to storage being allowed rather than normal, slower procedure?
Want me to take that one?
Yeah, thank you, Rich. Go ahead.
So if you look at Reg Guide 1.184, it's a NRC regulation that talks about, it's a Reg Guide, I'm sorry, that talks about decommissioning nuclear power plants. And it gives you three options. You can go to safe store, right, which is a 60-year option, right? You can go to Intome, which really was backing up a cement truck and pouring a containment, so nobody's doing that, right? Or you can go to Prompt Decon. And Holtec and many other companies that do decommissioning employ the decon concept. And what this does is it allows us to bring back taxable use of the land 40 to 45 years sooner than the safe store method. And also, if you look at the joint proposal, Entergy, Holtec in New York State, the AG office, right? Everybody agreed that we would get the plan back to reusable land use within a 12 to 15-year period. So that's the methodology we're following.
Bridget Freimeyer from the DPS, do you want to add to that?
Yes, I do. Thanks, Tom. The schedule that Holtec is proposing to move spent nuclear fuel from their Unit 2 and Unit 3 spent fuel pools to dry cask storage on the ISFC is consistent with current industry standards. They are not proposing to work at breakneck speed. The safest place for this fuel is in the dry casks. So there's a reason to move as expeditiously as possible without compromising safety. This topic is in the NRC's jurisdiction, and they have offered to present on spent fuel management at a future Decommissioning Oversight Board meeting. And as has been stated numerous times now at this meeting, we now have a state inspector on site at Indian Point. He will be monitoring the offloading of fuel from the spent fuel pools to dry cask storage. And any safety concerns or issues will be immediately raised to the licensee, to the state, and to the NRC.
Thank you. The next question, what examination are you prepared to do for the suitability of the casks that will be used to store irradiated fuel once it's removed from the fuel pool? Holtec is notorious for producing thin, inadequate casks that leak, while Germany and Sweden are using far superior and safer concrete casks to contain leaks and escaping radiation. Please let us know how you are dealing with the storage cask issue.
Would you like me to answer that question?
If you are prepared to answer it, that would be
Okay,
great.
So there's multiple parts to the question. So I'll go with the first one, examination method. So there is an aging management program that Holtec does have. It's after 20 years service life of the cask. For us, it kicks in 2028. Oyster Creek will be doing their first aging management procedure. We'll be down there with the people at Oyster Creek, monitoring their progress in agent management, and then we'll bring that up to Indian Point. That's the first part of the question. The second part of the question, and I mean this with all due respect, our casks are not thin-walled. I'm not sure where that term comes from, but when I look at the casks, the 27 inches of steel and concrete are on the outer perimeter. The canister lid and the overpack lid are another 18 inches, right, of steel and concrete. So I kind of disagree with the fact that we're calling these thin-walled casks, and I don't think that's just the right moniker to put on them. Furthermore, Ms. Slater, if you could tell me where any of these casks that Holtec produced are leaking, I'd appreciate that. And so what I'll do with that information is I'll take it back to our Camden office and really get the information down and find out what we could do from a corrective action standpoint at Indian Point. But I'm not aware of any casks that Holtec manufactures around the world that are leaking. I could be wrong, right? But I'd like to have that information, and I'll bring it back to Camden, and we'll straighten that out. Please let us know how you are dealing with the storage cask issue. I guess that's how I would answer that question. And I've gone through some of the casking of fuel in the previous slide, so
okay,
that's where I would stay with that.
Could I just ask Dave Lockbaum to speak on this from an independent technical expert standpoint?
Yeah, I would agree with Rich. The cask, whatever labels applied to them, are robust. They're designed for like 18-foot drops on a steel spike. They're designed to withstand 2,000-degree fires for several hours and so on. And one of the adverse consequences of using the casks that are used in Europe is that you have to use many, many more of them because they can't store as much spent fuel. So if you're worried about dropping it during a movement, or there's just many more things that can go wrong when you're using 40% more casks on-site and transport off-site. So there's no free lunch. The casks in Europe have some consequences. The casks in the United States have consequences. There's pros and cons. Neither one of them is inherently evil. Neither version is inherently safe. Both of them can go wrong if you mishandle them, and I think Rich and his program is there to try to minimize the things that can go wrong with the aging management and other mechanisms. So I have no problems whatsoever with the casks that are being used at Indian Point in that regard.
I think we have a DOB member who's participating virtually, County Legislator Borgia, who has a question. I'd like to give her an opportunity to ask a follow-up here.
Thank you. Yes, I am very relieved to hear about the aging management program at the Casks, because I feel like I've been asking this question for a really long time, almost before decommissioning, about how do you know when a cask is deteriorating. So I'm just hoping you can give us a little bit more detail about that, what that program is. What do you look for to see that a cask is performing adequately after the 20 years, and how frequently does that happen once a cask is in the aging management?
Rich, you want to take that, please?
So she's asking about the agent management program? I was
So,
hard to hear, I'm sorry.
I heard the question is, you have the aging management program. What do you look for?
That's a good question, right?
Right.
So really, we need to take the experience from Oyster Creek, right, to see exactly what we'll be looking for. But we'll absolutely use probes to go within the tank, probably in the vent ports, right, to look for any breaches in the MPC. That's what I'm thinking right now. Until I get some of the details from Oyster Creek, we can solidify that procedure here for Indian Point. Just let me clarify the 2028 timeframe. Our first cask at Indian Point was 2008, right? So it's a 20-year life cycle for agent management. That's why we're due in 2028. Oyster Creek casked fuel prior to that, and I think within the next year or so is when they'll kick in and do their investigations. And so, like I said, we'll be down there seeing what they're doing and mimic that up here. But for sure,
I understand that, and I appreciate that. And one of the reasons why the dry cask storage has always been, I've always had this question. I've represented the area for, almost 20 years now. So the question is, I guess, once that starts, understanding that you don't have all the technical details about what gets looked for, but once that starts, once a cask is 20 years and older, it's examined once in 20 years? It's examined every year after 20 years? What's the schedule?
I'd have to get back to you on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rich.
Tom, can I just ask a quick follow-up on aging management?
Richard Webster.
Richard Webster, yeah, sorry. So my question is you may not be able to answer this now I think about it. Is the goal of the aging management process to prevent through-wall leaks? First question. Second question, if you have a through-wall leak of the MPC, what's the consequence?
The goal is to ensure the integrity of the MPC, right? That would be the goal for any agent management program. We'd have to analyze on a case-by-case basis if there is a breach in the MPC. To date, I'm not aware of any that happened, but I could follow up and I could follow up with you and verify that.
That'd be great. Thanks, Rich.
Oh, you're welcome.
I think he didn't answer your follow-up. If there was a leak, what is the consequence?
The consequence would probably be based on the age of the fuel that's in the canister, right? We would, we would have the ability to, I think at that time, transfer the MPC to a high star and maybe reprocess the fuel somehow or reload it. I mean, I'd have to look. I don't have an answer to that yet.
Right, that's a question that I get asked a lot, and it's one that I'm not able to fully answer.
Understood.
Because, the cask is pressurized with helium, right? So to make
Correct.
sure the fuel doesn't catch fire. And I guess the question is, can you get enough oxygen in there for the fuel to catch fire?
Repeat back.
Can you get enough oxygen in there for the fuel to catch fire if you have a through-wall leak?
Can the fuel catch fire?
If there is a through-wall leak, could oxygen enter the cask sufficient to create a fire situation?
I'd have to get back to you, Rich. It's something that I have to get back to you.
Dave, did you want to have follow-up?
Yeah, I looked at that a few times and talked to a number of people. Because, as you mentioned earlier, the damaged fuel can't go into a cask unless it's protected for the damage. If there was a leak, very little or no radioactivity would get out. The fact that there's still heat being generated inside the cask would tend to cause a differential pressure that would keep oxygen from getting in until the pressure's equalized. And with the pressure's equalized, there's not a catalyst to drive oxygen inside. So you'd have lots of time, measured in years, to really deal with the problem. It wouldn't be 30 minutes from losing Buchanan or anything like that.
Yeah, so I'll talk to the Camden office and I'll get back to you on that.
Right. The next question on spent fuel management is, will you commit to separating the casks, hardened on-site storage or HOS?
Yeah, so I looked into that, and the hardened on-site storage, I read two articles, one from the Nuclear Information and Resource Service, and one from the Alliance for Nuclear Accountability. And I would say we're fairly consistent with those recommendations. So from a space perspective, we do have heat transfer calcs, which are part of the safety analysis for the casks themselves, and that determine the pitch or the distance between the casks, right? And each cask, as it sits on the pad, has 224 square feet of open air around it, which meets the heat transfer calc piece. Also, the HOSS recommends irradiated fuel must be stored as safely as possible, as close to the site of generation as possible. I'd say we meet that. HOSS facilities must not be regarded as permanent waste solution. That's why you have an MPC. The MPC is designed, right, to go into a high star for transport to an interim facility or a permanent facility. The facility must have real-time radiation and heat monitoring. I'll check into the heat monitoring piece. However, we do have real-time radiation monitoring at the pad itself. The overall objective of HOSS should be that the amount of releases projected and even severe attacks should be low enough that the storage system should be unattractive as a terrorist target. We've had impact tests on the canisters themselves without a breach of the MPC. And then placement of individual canisters that makes detection difficult from outside the site boundary. I'd say there's no issue north, east, and south. I've discussed this with Richard. At the end of the day, I project, or I've talked to my management already, to consider some camouflage netting around the canisters so that observation from the river will be minimized. Can't put a berm there just because of the topography of the area around the asphyxie pad, especially after we build the vehicle barrier fence. So I think our best bet, at least to comply to that last recommendation, would be some type of camouflage netting.
Thank you. Ms. Freimeyer, would you like to add anything?
Yes, just something real quick. Thank you. This is Bridget Freimeyer with the Department of Public Service. So the concepts promoted by hardened on-site storage are core areas of focus for the Decommissioning Oversight Board. Safety and security of the spent nuclear fuel at the Indian Point site are of paramount importance. And this topic was discussed at the last Decommissioning Oversight Board, and since then, as Rich stated, we've continued to explore additional safety measures, and we do welcome additional community feedback on this subject. And as stated earlier, time is going to be dedicated at a future meeting to discuss in depth the requirements related to spent fuel management, cask design, and on-site spent fuel storage. And I believe during this meeting alone, a few additional topic areas have come up that I think would be really important and helpful to address at that, during that discussion as well. So I'm keeping tabs for that.
Thank you. And the last question on this topic, how will a drone attack on the storage casks be prevented? A cybersecurity attack?
I spoke to the state police specifically about this issue. Their position is that there is no citizen-owned drone that could carry the payload that would have an effect if it were to shoot a missile at one of the casks. Also talked to my security department, and they're all in agreement with the same topic, right? So there's no civilian drone that could carry a payload big enough to penetrate the, at least the MPC, if not the entire canister itself. Cyber attack, I think we've already discussed that. I don't know if we have to discuss it any further. Like I said, anything that would have any effect on equipment that's needed, we would make sure the IT department does a thorough scrub on it, right, to make sure that there's no effect to the algorithms in the in the digital asset.
Mr. Lockbaum, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, thank you.
All right. So we'll go with follow-up questions. We'll start with virtual Susanna Glidden.
Yes, yes. Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, I just wanted to say, since I don't think Alice was able to be here, Slater, that what she was meaning to say were the thin-walled canisters with the gouge down them from the loading process, not the casks. And on this subject of damage, 3 things, please, just follow-up questions. Will there be a hot cell permanently on site for emergencies like a leak or a damaged rod? Or are there plans for at least an overpack, which is ventilated for cooling and transport, into which a leaking canister can be placed? The whole tech cask is ventilated. If there's leaking, a radiation monitor in the ventilation system is triggered. How much of a leak would it take to trigger the monitor? At what exact amount? And just one more thing, a pressure monitor, as we understand it, indicates if a leak is happening. And yet, to our knowledge, there are not any installed. Why is that? Thank you.
I'll have to follow up on all those questions.
Please, while you're at it too, Mr. Baroni, we are also concerned with one more issue. The whole text states that there's no likelihood of a canister leak for 20 years, that their canisters can last for 24 years. There are robotic crawlers which can measure the thickness of a canister. How often will Holtec do this? And on how many canisters? We've heard that Holtec states they're all the same, that 1 or 2 of them every 5 years is sufficient, but the welding, as has been pointed out, is never exactly the same. And each one, we feel, should be inspected and regularly. If there's a problem with a cask, they can pull out the canister and put it in a new cask and make sure the welds are in place. Thank you. Those are our serious questions. We'd appreciate your your education and answers on. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll put all the questions together and I'll answer.
Okay, we will get answers from Holtec in writing and post them on the website. Thank you.
I will say that the weld on the MPC lid is a machined weld. It's not a weld that's done by hand, right? So it's consistent, and it's consistently inspected and passed. So I'm
Speaking to the mic.
The weld on the MPC is done robotically. It's not done by hand, right? So there's consistency in the weld application itself and after it's tested. So, and we also pressure test the canisters also prior to putting them on the pad. So that works out for us also. But we'll get the list of questions and we'll answer those.
Dave Lockbaum?
This is Dave Lockbaum. I'd like to address one of those questions, was the question about the pressure monitoring inside the cell that would potentially indicate a leak. I did look into that many years ago because I had the same issue. It seemed like that'd be a good way to check on the integrity of a canister. And what I learned was that if you put a penetration in for the pressure cell, you're providing a pathway for leakage. So you're actually increasing the chances of the, so there's no free lunch again. You pay for that convenience with the increased chances of a failure.
You're going to sacrifice something by doing something like that. So.
Thank you. Do we have Alice Slater? No. Okay. Then the third person is Sally Jane Gellert? No. Okay.
Excuse me, Tony?
Yes.
Before you move to the next topic, I want to do a time check. It's almost 8:20. We have Enbridge here. Our plan originally was to tick through the topic areas, and pipelines were slated to be last. I'm starting to get concerned that we're bumping up against 9 o'clock, the end of the meeting, and it would be a shame not to get to the pipeline questions while Enbridge is actually here. So I'd recommend that we skip a few slides, get to the pipeline questions, and assuming we get through those with Enbridge present, we can go back to the regular schedule. Is that all right with everyone?
All right, thanks. The first pipeline question is, when will proper locating and marking of the Algonquin gas transmission pipeline's right-of-way at the Indian Point site commence and be completed? And what accounts for the delay of this critical process, especially during heavy loading, deconstruction, and excavation activities?
This is John Sheridan.
John, if you could speak directly into the mic, please.
Yep. John Sheridan, Enbridge Algonquin Gas Transmission Company. There have always been Algonquin pipeline markers at the IEP road crossing. Locating and line marking for vehicle crossings is normal practice, and thus is not a delay for vehicle crossing activities. Algonquin has fully cooperated with Indian Point and Holtec, Rich Baroni and his team regarding crossing activities and requirements for those activities, with oversight from the New York DPS Gas Safety Division.
Thank you. Next question. What are the dates thus far of Enbridge's on-site supervision of various decommissioning activities on and near the pipeline right-of-ways as required by PHMSA Operations and Maintenance Enforcement Guidance, Part 192, Subparts L and M? Please be specific. If there has been no on-site supervision by Enbridge, please explain.
John Sheridan with Enbridge Algonquin. The extent of involvement and interaction with Algonquin's pipelines at Indian Point consists of heavy vehicular crossing activities, and Algonquin has performed load crossing analysis as is consistent with normal operating procedure. Algonquin has met with Holtec personnel on site, and they've taken all precautions for the road crossings to Algonquin's satisfaction. On-site supervision of heavy vehicular load crossings is not normal. Installation of steel plates at the crossing location, in addition to load crossing analysis, are sufficient for crossings identified at this location. On-site supervision is a common practice where excavation takes place at or near the pipeline right-of-way. No excavation or ground disturbance activities have been identified at this location that conflict with Algonquin's assets.
Could I ask a follow-up question there? There was a fault on a different feeder months ago. You know, Rich mentioned that they fixed a fault in the last few weeks. There was another one, and that feeder runs closer to the pipeline. It doesn't? That feeder, that excavation didn't happen closer to the pipeline?
Yeah, it did, you're right. However, part of the MOU that we have is if we were to excavate anything close to the pipeline, right, we contact Enbridge, and they'll verify it. Yeah, so you're right, now that I remember.
So with that excavation?
Enbridge was contacted, and they did observe that.
Okay.
You're right. It was
Thank
right
you.
by the road.
All set? Has the co-located Indian Point nuclear facility and Algonquin gas transmission pipelines been included in Governor Hochul's newly formed Joint Security Operations Center? And please explain your response.
I think we
Good
have,
evening. My name is.
thank
Can
you,
hear me
Jennifer.
okay?
Go ahead. Yep, go ahead. We hear you.
Thank you. Jennifer Waka, representative for the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services, and thank you for the question. The Indian Point nuclear facility and the Algonquin gas pipeline are privately owned and responsible for ensuring that they are in compliance with all state and federal security and cybersecurity regulations. The initial priority for the JSOC, or the Joint Security Operations Center, will be on securing county and municipal governments. As the JSOC's work expands, it's our expectation that certain public utilities and critical infrastructure will be concluded as the program continues to grow. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I would just add that, you know, I think there have been a number of questions submitted in previous meetings as well on cyber, and we'll look to have perhaps a broader discussion at a future DOB meeting on cyber issues.
Thank you. This is more of a suggestion than a question. We need to purge and shut pipeline for safety.
Hi, this is Arpit Mehta from New York State DPS, the Pipeline Safety Section. As a result of its 2018 risk assessment, New York State sent a letter to FERC requesting that it consider temporarily ceasing gas operations near Indian Point as a possible risk mitigation strategy if decommissioning activities, threaten the integrity. However, this does not imply that New York State recommends shutting down the gas pipeline operations without cause. Further, since then, we've received the NRC's 2020 Expert Evaluation Team report, which reviewed previous risk analyses that were done on the pipeline in Indian Point. And then also we await the Oak Ridge National Laboratories analysis report. And then finally, we also acknowledge that Richard Kuprowitz, when he spoke to the Decommissioning Oversight Board, he also noted that removing the pressure from the pipeline does not necessarily protect the pipeline from potential damage, and that could also result, and does not necessarily result in greater safety, since essentially the fault is still there and then would become apparent once the pipeline then returns to operations.
Thank you.
I don't know if John wants to add to that at all, or Rich, either of you. No.
Tom, I don't think we have any more comments on that.
Okay.
All right, thank you. When will the Oak Ridge risk assessment be completed? Does the risk assessment take into account all the Indian Point nuclear facilities infrastructure, nuclear waste, decommissioning activities co-located with the gas transmission pipelines? Does the risk assessment address the specific questions and points specified by Mr. Rick Krupwitz, President of Accufax? Mr. Krupwitz has stated that a truly independent safety analysis should be performed subject to a reasonable open peer review, and that security claims should not be permitted to shelter malfeasance in a scientific method involving incomplete risk analysis for such a highly sensitive infrastructure.
This is Arbit Mehta from DPS Pipeline Safety Section again. PHMSA has not provided a timeline for completion of the Oak Ridge risk assessment. We await those results and we'll come prepared when the report is released.
Excellent, thank you. And then for follow-up questions, virtually, Ellen Weiniger. Should be unmuted. Maybe.
Yes, thank you. Let me go back to a couple of things. One is just in terms of the points that Mr. Kuprowitz stated, that lowering of pressure indeed is not an adequate measure, and in fact, it would involve shutting and purging the pipeline, because we know we have other instances where just shutting the pipeline, leaving the gas in place, does not assure any safety or protections. So in that vein, again, going back to these markings, I understand that some of those vehicle crossings that you described have markings, but we understand from site tours that on site at Indian Point, that there do not appear to be markings, so that new workers who come across the property and initiate work may have no knowledge of the pipeline and its locations, and can initiate activities as different aspects of the work continue. So that's where that question arose from. And I know that that was a point that Mr. Kuprowitz had identified and emphasized. So it seems that perhaps there are some markings, but not a complete identification and marking. And could you please address that?
John Sheridan with Dunbridge Algonquin. We will certainly go back and verify that, but to my knowledge that the pipeline markers are out there, and they are identified at the road crossing. But we'll certainly come back to this, provide that response to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
You know, and verify that within the
Yeah,
next
and
24
I would also add that Mr. Kuprowitz did request that a plan, properly implemented plan, be independently verified for effectiveness. And that as a result, you know, and indeed that a recommendation to cease gas operations during decommissioning activities that may threaten pipeline integrity, while extreme, would be appropriate. So it would be helpful to understand if there are verified plans by an independent peer-reviewed source. Can anyone answer that?
This is John Sheridan from Enbridge Algonquin. I'm not aware of any plan that you just identified. We continue to work with Holtec on communicating and coordinating activity out there, and that's done with the oversight of the New York DPS Gas Safety Division unit, and we continue that dialogue and to ensure that the pipeline is safe, and we're working and collaborating with Holtec on their activity as well.
Can I just jump in on that one? You said you have an MOU, is that public?
Repeat back, I'm sorry.
Is the MOU public? Have we posted that?
MOU.
Is it,
You
is
said
there,
you posted it last time.
is there an issue with posting it?
The MOU.
The MOU between Holtec and Enbridge that pertains to the pipeline?
If you want to see a copy of it,
Yeah.
I can get it to you.
That'd be great, thank you. I think more than me want to see a copy of it. I think everybody'd like to see a copy, Rich, so if you could give it to you.
Yeah, I mean, to the extent there's anything critical infrastructure that needs to be blacked out, we can, but we can post otherwise, right?
It's a joint MOU, so I have to make sure that Enbridge and
Sure.
myself are.
We'd ask you guys to take a look at how we can make that
Yeah.
public.
Richard, if you want to see a copy, just let me know.
All right, thank you. I'll do the same. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, the next topic is exemption requests, license amendment requests, and spent fuel pool water. All right, and the question is, how will public officials prevent NRC controversial exemptions and relaxations of regulations rather than, how will public officials prevent NRC exemptions and relaxations of regulations rather than putting it on the public to do?
I'll take this one. Elise Peterson from NYSERDA. While we continue to encourage members of the public to file comments and engage with federal representatives, New York State does review all exemptions and license amendment requests. We review those on their merits. We do actively engage with NRC based on those merits. And we have submitted comments on a number of exemption requests and license amendment requests pertaining to Indian Point, as well as the decommissioning rulemaking. Many of those comments have been posted to make it easy for you to view. Those are on the DOB website. So I encourage you to go to that website and read the comments in detail.
Thank you. And that was Susanna Glidden's question. Do we have her virtually? And she's unmuted, so if you have any follow-up questions, Ms. Glidden? All right. No question?
Sorry, you usually finish the slide and then ask us, so I wasn't quite ready, sorry. Yes, it disturbed us that you said to us that we have to do this, the public. And honestly, each of you DOB members, that's why you are here, helping represent us. You can't ask us to do this. You've got to, we want to know if the DOB, once you get the review from the state, that's what, Tom, you told us last meeting, the state agencies were reviewing and considering these exemptions, including NYSERDA, and that once you knew of their review and the findings, that you would come and bring those to us. We want to know. It's 2 months later. What are they? Instead of telling us to read it on the website. And our big question is, will the DOB write an opposition to the relaxation of the interim insurance and the other two things that are not in my mind just immediately? There were 3 exemptions, and we're very opposed to any of them. Thank you.
I think Assemblywoman Galiff?
Sandy Galiff, I'm certainly opposed to the exemptions, and just so you know, there hasn't been a board decision to oppose everything, but I know that I have sent a letter to the NRC opposing it and asking the public, but we're back to the public, but I think it's important for the public to comment, and I'm glad NYSERDA has, and so I would suggest everybody here in this audience, except for the people that want the exemptions,
Can I ask a question?
to send a letter, and I think the final date is August 31st. So this is the time to speak out on this.
Senator Harcum?
Hey there, it's Pete Harcum. Susanna, we've worked together for a long time, and you and your colleagues have requested a number of letters from us, FERC, PHMSA, NRC. We're always happy in our office to reach out on your behalf. So, this takes many different forms, state agencies, Sandy, me, but we've had a good collaboration. We continue to work with you and other members of the public, and it's a form of holding us accountable, and we're happy where appropriate to partner with you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you very much. We're a little unclear, please, in a follow-up question on this. let's see, the whole tech wants a relaxation of federal regs for emergency planning. Oh my gosh, that's frightening. And the thing that really we need a clarification on is contents of casks. Besides the insurance, what does that second exemption for contents of casks refer to? What is that about? Can you explain that?
Rich, you want to explain that request?
No. That's where we can cask an assembly, a fuel assembly that's potentially degraded and has a source in it. The
So this is
sources
what you
we
were
use-
referring to before, where you found 12 casks that were
Yeah,
damaged?
that was
Under
the-
existing rules, you're not allowed to put those in a cask because you found
Right.
issues? And so you want to explain those issues to the NRC, and you've requested that they allow you to cast those damaged assemblies?
Correct.
Susanna, does that answer your question?
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I believe, did I have another? Yes, Dave Lockbaum?
When this issue came up earlier, I researched the exemption process for decommissioning plants. In August of 1999, the NRC staff identified 43 regulations that don't apply during decommissioning. In 2000, the NRC commissioner said, we don't regulate by exemption. Apparently, one of the exemptions is to that policy of regulating by exemption. They started a rulemaking in the late 90s to fix the problems they knew about and abandoned it or suspended it because of 9/11, which I believe was more than 20 years ago, which was a blink of an eye in NRC space. They restarted the process in 2015 to change the regulations, and I don't know why they put it on fast speed, because now it was 7 years later, and they're less than a year away from perhaps having a final rule. In the meantime, they're charging Holtec money for reviewing at over $300 an hour the license, the exemption requests. Holtec is paying more for the NRC's review than their annual fee if that regulations were done. So the NRC's snail's pace is not doing the public any good, it's not doing the community any good, and it's not doing Holtec any good. I don't know why they're doing that. So when I found that out, I made that information available to the NRC Inspector General, who looks into NRC wrongdoing in April of this year. So we'll see if the NRC Inspector General will light a fire or whatever it takes to get the NRC to do it. If the NRC doesn't want to do its job, there's McDonald's that is hiring. Perhaps we could get a new slate of folks in there who will do the job rather than just take the money.
Rich,
So just to me, and with all due respect, right, the regulations as written do not really support a defueled reactor, okay? So that's why we need to, maybe exemptions is the wrong word, right? And maybe that's the negative connotation, right? But what we're trying to do is just have rules in place that are commensurate with a deregulated, or I'm sorry, with a defueled reactor. That's the only thing we're doing, right? And it's consistent with what every other plant in this country has done with regards to decommissioning. So, I mean, I question why we're so far against some of the exemptions, and maybe we just need to explain them better, right? But right away, we come out, with all due respect, really, right? Right away, we come out with negative connotation, and we don't want this and we don't want that, when maybe we just need to further explain exactly what we're trying to do here, all right? So yeah, the biggest one that's coming up is the post-decommissioning emergency plan. But there's a science behind that that allows us to do that, all right? And that's what all this is based on. It's based on science, right, and fact. And I understand the emotion piece, and I hope I'm not getting emotional, but, you know, that's not the intent here. The intent is just to comply with science in a deregulated environment. I'm sorry, a decommissioned environment. We're already deregulated. Right? And that's the only intent. That is the only intent, right? It saves money at the end of the day for us to further decommission the unit and not really worry about the budget on a month-to-month basis. It costs us X amount of dollars, right, to get a LAR approved, and it takes a year. It takes a year's time. And that doesn't include requests for additional information that the NRC will give us on every LAR we submit. All due respect to the community, I understand the position there, but my only point is these LARs and these exemption requests are based on science, right? And if we don't want to agree to the science, that's okay, I get it, right? But let's not automatically just say I'm against exemptions when we really don't know the details. That's my only point.
And I'll say on behalf of the state that when we review those requests, it's also based on science, and it's also based
Absolutely.
on the merits and the comments that we file. Taking positions on your requests are going to be based on what we believe are arguments on the merits, and you know, we're going to disagree from time to time on sort of how to approach that. So, you know, respect the discussion, but we'll likely respectfully disagree
this lady
from time
to
to
my
time.
left?
Yes.
She has reviewed all the exemptions for the most part. We have a working relationship, and we resolve the comments. And at the end of the day, she'll tell me, listen, I don't agree with this exemption.
Right.
I mean, that's okay,
Yep.
right? The NRC has the final say.
Correct.
Right? And we'll take back the comments, and we'll make adjustments as necessary.
Right. I mean, what you've requested versus, you know, what ultimately NRC lands on, it may be something in the middle,
Yeah, absolutely.
right?
But, you know, the point I'm trying to make, we're not doing anything different
Mhm.
than any other plant in this country. We're not.
Tom,
And Dave's right. If we had rulemaking, you wouldn't even know half of this stuff that we're trying to get rectified.
Richard Webster?
Quick question, Richard here. Has the state taken a position on the emergency planning exemption?
That exemption is still under review.
And what's the schedule for your review to be completed?
NRC's review is scheduled to be completed, I believe, next January. So we would be seeking to complete our review sometime in the fourth quarter, so the fall.
But isn't the comment period closing? For the
The state has, it is afforded a state consultation period that is in addition to the public comment period.
Oh, okay, thank you.
And I just want to clarify, I think we're talking about two related but slightly distinct concepts. Mr. Lockmont's talking about the NRC's process for adopting a new set of comprehensive regulations to address decommissioned power plants. What Mr. Baroni's talking about with these license amendment requests are amendments or exemptions from the existing regulations. So I think the deadline that Assemblywoman Galiff referred to, August 31st, that is the deadline for commenting on the NRC's broader decommissioning rulemaking process. The timeline for the state to comment on license amendment requests, correct me if I'm wrong, Elise, because this is your area of expertise, but there is no firm deadline. We can talk to the NRC whenever we feel it's necessary. Is that correct?
Correct. We can engage with NRC at any time, and we do take advantage of that opportunity regularly. You know, NRC, as I think Rich mentioned, NRC takes about a year to process any given license amendment, and you know, our review schedule mirrors NRC's. We do make sure that we do engage with NRC and submit any comments we may have in time for NRC to deal with that in their decision-making process.
Thank you, Elisa. Then, and again, this is Ryan Coyne. Just one other brief point on that. With respect to the emergency planning license amendment, that would apply to the emergency plan that's in place following all of the spent fuel being placed onto the ISPC pad. Is that correct, Rich?
One more time. It's hard for me to hear you through the mask.
Sure, no, I understand. The emergency plan license amendment request
For the PDAP.
For the PDAP, that applies to the procedures that would be in place after all of the fuel is on the pad. Is that correct?
That's not true.
Okay.
It would apply to post-circ fire window. In effect, right, our post-circ fire window is effect August 1st. We need to wait to employ the post-decommissioning emergency plan until February because the NRC needs that time to approve the exemption.
Okay.
So if the NRC was, let's say they could approve an exemption in 6 months, we can go to that PDEP, when's August 1st, Monday? Monday, right? But we're holding off. We have to hold off. We don't have the license amendment to do that. But it's not based on fuel on pad protected. It's based on Zerk fire window.
Okay. All right, thank you for that clarification.
One additional, this is Dave Lockbaum, one additional point on the exemptions of potential consequences is that nobody has infinite resources. So if Holtec or anybody's following cybersecurity requirements that aren't applicable to a decommissioning plant, that's taking management attention and resources away from things that could be better applied, where they actually do have a safety nexus. So it's diluting the focus, lessening the safety barriers, and it's actually undermining safety, so it's less relaxing, it's reducing safety, if there's a science-based reason for the change. And I agree with many of the requests, not all, but many of the requests, and that if the changes are made, then you're actually, again, sharpening the focus on areas that it should be focused on, not wasting time and effort on areas of no consequence.
Exactly.
Excellent, thank you. Next topic is water discharge. We need to hold treated water on site without dumping into the Hudson River that flows both ways and is used by communities downstream and upstream for safety. Will Holtec commit to this, and will DOB advocate for this?
Rich, earlier you mentioned that you wanted to get into more detail about the process.
How about
I think
we do this? We can combine this question with the next one, and there was also a late ad about opposition to water being dumped. So, again, with all respect to the DOB and all respect to the community people behind me, I mean this sincerely, all right? We do not dump to the river, right? People have been on tour. We've explained in detail exactly what we do, right? Any water that we discharge methodically and in a controlled fashion to the river is water that's been used through refueling processes throughout the years. It's not new water, all right? That's number one. Number two, all right, the water that we do discharge, and again, I really sincerely mean, I'm not trying to downplay anything, but the water is filtered, we house it in the collection tanks, we circulate it, we analyze it, right? And from a radionuclide perspective, right, we do not exceed 0.1% of the allowable NRC limits. Not 0.1% do we exceed. We have the Speedies permit issued by the state of New York, right? That's still active, right? We've had that, right? And that monitors boron, lithium, oil and grease, and total suspended solids. Again, we do that in accordance with state regulations, right? And at the end of the day, we're required to submit to the NRC an annual radiological environmental operating report. And that has the results of our REMP program and a radioactive effluent release report every year. So, again, this is an emotional topic, and I understand the perception, but it's not like, we explained this to Richard on his tour. It's not like we have these tanks, right, that have never seen the light of day, and we open the valve and we dump to the river. We just don't do that. We're not allowed to do that. Personally, I tried to take this one step further, in that there is a report, right? State of the Hudson. So I was not concerned, but I was wondering if I went through this report, what would it have regarding contaminants from Indian Point and its effect on the Hudson? Short answer is, and I'll talk to Kelly about this, we'll do some further digging, but none of the radionuclides or none of the things that we discharge to the river are noted as a concern in this report. The report talks about PCBs, basically from the GE factories up north, I think they were, dioxins from herbicides, cadmium from a battery manufacturing plant, and DDT, I guess the US military used that for control of malaria and typhus. Now I know I'm not an expert, right? And I know there's other data out there, but I wanted to convince myself that, we were not harming the environment. And so if I read this report, and I'll talk with Kelly more, and I'll talk with Richard, right? He's the expert for Riverkeeper. Let's see if we could do something here that at least changes some of the perception here, right? We do not dump to the river. And the fact, I'm going to be honest with you, I take offense to that word because it's not what we do. And it's not what Holtec's about, and it's not what all the plants in this country are about. Good, bad, or indifferent, we've had this process in place since 1962. Why it's a huge issue now, I understand why some of the press that came down from upstate, I got that from Massachusetts. I understand that. Totally different scenario than we have, right? But that's just the fact, right? Again, I go back to the science. As an engineer, I go back to science, right? And the science allows me to do that. NRC allows me to do it, and the state allows me to do it. So we're not here to contaminate the Hudson River. We're not here to do that.
Rich, you mentioned that over the years you were required to analyze and measure the radiological limits, et cetera. Dave Lockbaum has gone back through all the records and looked at that data. Dave, do you want to speak to this issue as well?
Yeah, I went back through like 20 years worth of the annual reports to look, and I think the highest value was 5% of the federal limit. Millions of gallons have been discharged, not dumped, into the Hudson River. And I also looked at the sampling of the Hudson River to see if it's bioaccumulating or it's collecting, and it's detectable in some cases, but generally not. The one exception that I'd point out to the statement about all country, the Wolf Creek plant in Kansas discharges its water to a man-made lake that there's no recirculation. Since it began operating in 1985, it's now polluted that lake to over 20,000 picocuries per liter of tritium because that has no place to go. But the Hudson River is different. I mean, it's going to dilute that discharge, so present minimal harm. So I wouldn't recommend that practice in Wolf Creek in Kansas, but I don't see a problem with it at Indian Point because you're so far below the federal limits.
Richard,
Dave,
Webster?
just
Yeah.
a quick clarification.
Yeah.
Is the federal limit the EPA drinking water limit that you're talking about?
No, I'm sorry. The limit I was talking to, there is an EPA limit, but the NRC has, I forget the 10 CFR 20 Appendix I, has a limit on each radionuclide, strontium, the whole gamut. So and then collectively you roll that up to see what the maximum exposure to a person might be.
Right. Can I say, I think a way to present this in a way that people can understand would be to add up the activity discharged, in milligrams per liter, picocuries per liter, and compare that to the drinking water limit. Because if we're way below the drinking water limit, even before we're discharging into the Hudson, I think that might inform some people's opinion.
So you want to use drinking water as a reference point? That's what you're saying?
Yeah, if we
The drinking water limits.
The drinking water limits. There's a 50,000 picocurie per liter limit, I think. 20,000? Yeah, 20,000 limit. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of debate about whether that's a protective standard, but if you're discharging, much below that, then I think it will really show that there isn't a major issue, certainly with drinking water.
I'll follow up on it.
I've already collected that data. For a small price, I can provide it for free. I'll get that data out.
Right, thanks, Dave.
Assemblywoman Galen?
Sandy Galiff. Rich, there have been a lot of articles about Plymouth, which you own, and, Cape Cod Bay. Can you tell us what the difference is? I mean, they're in an uproar about what's happening.
I understand.
And you kind of mentioned that. Can you tell us what the state regulations are? They very different than what we have? What's the difference in the situation?
I could only tell you what I know about the Pilgrim Station is when Entergy was its owner, the site vice president at the time made a commitment not to discharge to the bay. I don't know why he made that commitment. He's no longer even with Entergy, right? I don't know why he made that commitment, right? And we never have made a commitment like that, right? So that's the reason. So now But to Dr. Singh's credit, right, obviously we want to go back to the Bay, and he's hiring a third-party consultant just to verify that what we discharge, what Pilgrim discharges to the Bay is acceptable in limits. So that's what they're doing up there now. I don't know why those Ms. Scala,
Right.
that, I don't know why they made that commitment to begin with. I just don't know why.
Let's go back a second, though, with when Entergy owned Indian Point. One of the reasons that they decided to sell and get out of the business was they weren't making money, but they were also going to have to redo the plant in relationship to the Hudson River and putting in a filtration system or whatever it was. So was that not related to this at all? Is that a whole different?
Kelly?
Kelly Turturro. That was related to cooling water and the withdrawal of the Hudson River water for cooling water for the plant. And as the mayor just noted, there were concerns about how that intake was affecting species in the Hudson River fish, essentially.
So nothing about radioactive waste?
No, that's not what the speedies permit was looking at. And if I, just while I have the floor, if I could just speak to the second question, which is, will the DOB advocate for this? I just wanted to say on behalf of the DOB, we will work through all the appropriate regulatory agencies to make sure that the discharges from the plant meet all applicable standards. As I mentioned earlier, there is a New York State DEC speedies permit in place, and that governs the non-radiological discharges from the facility. Any of the radiological discharges from the facility, as David and Richard mentioned earlier, are regulated under federal standards and regulated by the NRC. Thank you.
Thank you. Tony?
Excellent. Susanna Glidden, did you have any follow-up questions related to water discharge? Might have.
Yes, please. I just have to say, on behalf of friends who live in Poughkeepsie City and Rhinebeck Village, I do want to make a statement here that they, and we too, feel there is no safe allowable limit of radiation as NRC falsely regulates. No amount of exposure to radiation is safe. So it's not about measuring the amount and staying under, quote, detectable limits. It's about what happens if we ingest it. And again, the Hudson's a tidal basin flowing upstream and downstream, but NRC only acknowledges downstream. There are 7 communities upstream and over 100,000 people in those 7 communities who rely on the river for their drinking water. So they remain concerned that these limits, and you're staying under them, is too much, too high, and they don't want to see any more, I won't say dumping in the sense that you say it's diluted and filtered and whatnot, but they don't want anything going into the Hudson. So I must represent them in saying what I've just said. Thank you.
Thank you. The next topic.
Excuse me, Tony, I'm sorry. I think it's 9 o'clock, and the next topic is emergency preparedness, and this is a topic area where we've received a lot of questions. There's a tremendous amount of interest. And we unfortunately planned to have an emergency preparedness presentation at the last meeting, and due to the technical glitches and other reasons, we ran over and didn't get to it. And here we are, 9 o'clock, and not getting to the questions on emergency preparedness. So this is what I'd like to propose. Because at the September meeting, we are planning that presentation that we lost at the last meeting. There were so many questions on this topic for the public forum that I'd like to propose, I'm doing this on the fly, apologize, but I'd like to propose that we add a public forum component to the next meeting directly for emergency preparedness. So we have the presentation, and then we have these questions that have been submitted that people took time to prepare, and we have the ability to have the back and forth with the public on those questions following the presentation, which might make a lot of sense anyway. Is that acceptable to the members of the DOB? And that way we can end the public forum portion tonight. I really appreciate Rich and John, you being here to answer the public's questions. I'm sure, we're going to be calling on you again, and, appreciate, your ongoing accessibility. As I wrap up, I want to just remind members of the public that there are other ways to comment. We do receive and monitor the written comments that get submitted to our website. These are the instructions. You can go to the next slide, please. Again, want to stress the importance of following up and subscribing to our service list. Best way to get our information and stay up to date. Next slide. We have updated our website and continue to do so, so please use it. And now next steps. There are a lot of good ideas coming from the public and from DOB members about additional topics for us to discuss at future meetings. I want to just, show the public the topics that are being planned. We just discussed the need for an emergency preparedness and response presentation at the next meeting. It's going to be our top priority, and we'll add a public forum component to that. We're going to continue to talk dust control, site and environmental cleanup, spent fuel pool water management, Casks design management, site hardening. I thought the discussion and the back and forth on that was good today. I appreciated the questions, and we'll continue discussing those topics. Waste management and shipping, and managing risk of extraordinary events. Supervisor Becker, you had some additional thoughts of topics.
Yeah, I just want to get one thing. Is this on? You can hear me? Good. One topic that I think that we need to have the DOB start to follow that's new. It was on News Channel 12, and the mayor of Buchanan and I talked about it, and it involves all the agencies in front of me, so what a coincidence to have Holtec and Enbridge, as well as NYSERDA particularly, and DEC and Public Service in front of us, that there are several proposals to bring green electricity from upstate New York down to Queens. One of the projects, called Clean Path, originates all the way upstate, goes 175 miles, basically a really long extension cord, under the Hudson River, on its way to Queens, New York. Certainly, I think everyone here is going to be in favor of wind energy and solar energy. But the problem is, out of the 950 towns in this state and the thousands of villages, guess which village they decided to come out into that has a big mark on it and a decommissioned nuclear power plant and an Enbridge gas pipeline. Let's bring a power line through there. And so they're looking at Lents Cove. Now, landing in Lents Cove is not on the Holtec property. It's north of it. But they have to go south. And they're going to go down 9 or 9A. They're going to go through the village of Verplanck, hamlet of Verplanck, the village of Buchanan, through the town of Cortland. That's another complicating factor that we just don't need now. And it's early enough in the process that I think NYSERDA in particular, because this is, and no exaggeration to the public, an $11 billion project funded by New York State. $11 billion. So the company that's doing this feels empowered, no pun intended, to bring their electricity through this village and hamlet of Verplanck and town of Cortland, and we just don't need it anymore. We're dealing, and all the concerns you hear about monitoring the coexistence of Enbridge and Holtec, and they're working very hard, and they have this MOU, and they're trying to do well, but the public has a lot of concerns. To add a third layer of concern is just untenable, and it's not thought out. there's got to be another route from upstate New York to Queens. Not only that, there's no benefit to this community. You would think that if you're going to bring a power cable down through this community, like the pipeline, in which we have a decommissioned plant, which, you know, that's not to Holtec, that's to Entergy, which now we don't have that funding for the school system. What's the benefit? I know the cost, another burden to our community, but what's the benefit? So I think this is something that the DOB has to start to entertain and at least get on its radar. It's early enough that perhaps an alternate route can be developed, or a more thoughtful process of all the other processes that are going on. We've been so concerned about keeping this process safe, and you know, I'm so grateful that Rich comes to all these meetings and answers our questions. But we now have a third entity. We just don't need it. And it's right now it's on the at the early stage where it's just lines on paper, and we got to move those lines. Thank you.
Don't move them, erase them.
Thanks, Rich. I'm biting my tongue just because we're out of time, but I want to say that this is a project that was contracted for NYSERDA. It's intended to help meet the CLCPA Clean Energy Standard requirements to bring renewables into New York City. Pretty critical climate infrastructure, but the route is still obviously in play, and that will have to come to the Public Service Commission for approval. The initiative itself and the contract and the concept is already approved by the commission, contracted, selected by NYSERDA. But the route itself still needs to go through all the siting, and so that's why they're going and meeting with all the local communities that would be impacted. I'll have to discuss with council in terms of the appropriateness of our involvement with a presentation to the task force or DOB, but I think it's fair game as a topic for discussion, so we'll talk about how to do that at a future meeting.
And I just want to make a very quick comment because I know we're out of time. So I'm in total agreement with the supervisor. Our board discussed it. It is not a benefit for the community, but something you just said, Tom, it's going to benefit New York City. There is no benefit for our community. So they need to figure this out. I mean, we have a lot of critical infrastructure in our area, and it's not appropriate. But being the nice person that I am, I did come with an alternative route for them. So hopefully they'll listen to that. And I'm not saying where, but there is a simpler, more direct alternative route for them. So that's all I'm going to say.
Thank you very much.
I agree with that.
And look, I think tonight's public forum was very informative. I again want to thank the public for the questions in advance. It allowed us to organize those into the topic area. We're going to continue with this and continue the public forum on emergency preparedness at the next meeting. Next meeting is September 22nd. Everyone will get notified, and we'll request additional questions as well. Thank you all very much.